Chapter 581. Although Gryffindor could be careless, Slytherin sometimes ruined every delicious potion with a tweak. But a kitchen full of quarrels and warmth was the best kind of kitchen. Even after arguing, they would sit down together to enjoy a well-cooked codfish. "They're gone, and we've become meaningless," Hubao said. "New wizards will discover you later," John replied, watching a dish come out of the oven. "They're like the four founders, bringing friends to this magical place." "You're right." Hubao's spout tilted up in a happy curl. A new smell rolled through the room. John sighed. "John, this dish is called Thunderclap." Daphne's face still had streaks of ginger on it, and John wanted to ask who had invented this abomination. Mashed potatoes mixed with ginger paste, some durian to thicken it, and what looked suspiciously like ketchup on top. He hesitated. Hannah stared at the thing called Thunderclap, as if one bite might set off a bomb in her mouth. "No, don't make me hold this. Get it away from me. I can't stand it," the plate wailed. John picked up a spoon and, despite himself, scooped a spoonful. "You're not going to eat that, are you?" Hubao shrieked. John tapped the table with a finger and said, calmly, "Filling your stomach is the happiest thing." "Don't touch me. It tickles," the table giggled. He put the thunderclap in his mouth. His eyes widened. The magic in that bite moved through him, not weaker than the last dish he'd tasted. He looked at Daphne, still with ginger on her cheek, and realized the emotion in her cooking was being turned into magic. He took a second bite. John kept eating Thunderclap. Despite the odd particles and the glue-like texture, it had one real merit. The ketchup was actually ketchup. That was about it. A whole plate vanished, and John calmly wiped his mouth with a napkin. A strange lock on the back of the head chef's big cupboard clicked open. The cupboard had 4 locks in total, 3 still remained. John stared for a moment and said to Daphne, "I hope there are more dishes." She jumped a little, then brightened. "You like to eat?" I just want to eat," John admitted. He had no sense of taste, so flattering him with a reason would have been dishonest. Daphne was delighted and hugged Hannah. The cupboard, grumpy and temperamental, angrily tossed out 2 bowls. "The distinguished guest still wants to order food? Hurry up then," it grumbled. They dodged flying tableware and ran back to the cooking area. John eating Thunderclap had given Daphne enormous confidence. She began directing Hannah like an experienced chef. Hannah followed, eager to learn. For a while they forgot who was teacher and who was student. Hubao stared in admiration and obsequiously refilled John's teacup. Kitchen tools clanged and clattered in a domestic symphony. Soon a second dish arrived, typhoon shelter-style fried noodles. There was literally a breeze of wind whipping through the noodles. John watched the floating strands, puzzled. Why did cooking come with special effects? Professor Binns had always described Hufflepuff as selfless, John remembered. Hufflepuff's Chamber of Secrets, he had thought, might not contain powerful alchemy or dangerous spells. Ravenclaw had left love. Hufflepuff might have left something gentler, a memory, a regret, or recipes woven with emotion. Witches often preserved feelings in subtler ways than wizards. After the noodles, John stared at the crab he'd just consumed, wondering how he'd eaten its gills without noticing. He wiped his mouth and took a sip of tea to clear the taste, then said in his quiet, detached voice, "Another different one." The second lock on the cupboard's back opened. Of course, the locks opened as they ate. John's certainty that this was Hufflepuff's Chamber of Secrets deepened. "You want to eat more?" Hannah asked, surprised. "Of course," John said. "Perhaps my appetite is a bit large." Hannah's expression flickered. Those dishes had been far from ordinary. As expected of the King of Hogwarts, she thought. He was different. Maybe the Constellation Society liked this sort of thing. Neville. Hannah mulled over whether learning that cookbook would have been wise. Daphne happily rushed off to fetch more ingredients. Before long, a freshly baked West Coast blue lobster was placed before John. Under Hannah's conflicted gaze, he snapped off the head and saw the meat dyed an unnatural blue. The sight alone was nauseating. Apart from blueberries, what food should be blue? John closed his eyes and ate. The third dish was done. The fourth dish arrived. John followed the same routine, closing his eyes and finishing it quickly. The last bite might have been raw meat or fish. He didn't know. Then, click. All 4 locks released. John wiped his mouth and looked up. The cupboard itself seemed to notice the locks were open and furiously threw out more tableware. My back is open. John floated the cupboard gently with a flick of his hand and went to the back. What's in here? Daphne and Hannah followed. John patted the rear of the cupboard, but there was no answer. He pulled it open, and a small compartment revealed itself. Dozens of parchments tumbled out. Daphne picked one up and read with a puzzled expression. 100 Ways to Cook Potatoes? Hannah held another. Complete Guide to Cooking Scottish Round-Faced Fat Chickens? Ding, Hufflepuff's Chamber of Secrets discovered. Ding, challenge mission completed. Find the chambers of secrets of the other two founders before the end of the school year. Receive mission reward, Magic Blood +1. John found a parchment titled Griffin Loin Cooking Method. These are recipes? Hannah hesitated. John picked up another parchment, Dragon Liver Deficiency Treatment Method, and realized aloud, no, these are cooking methods for magical creatures. He flipped through them in silence. Over 90% of the ingredients in these recipes were now classified as protected magical animals. He finally understood why Hufflepuff had hidden them. Later, these would become illegal practices. I should have seen it coming, John said with a rueful smile, but no regret. This was the last stubbornness of a true food lover. If these had been passed down in Hogwarts, he mused, many graduates might have been tempted to take dangerous risks. Hubal leapt up and said, I remember. Hufflepuff argued with the other three founders because she wanted to keep the recipes. You could imagine how complicated the other founders felt when they saw a tome called 100 Ways to Cook Magical Animals. John shook his head and gathered the recipes. His hand settled on 100 Ways to Cook Potatoes. This one can be kept, he said. He had long resented the house elves' never-changing skin-on potatoes. He hoped Hufflepuff's recipes would teach them better ways. Hannah was still a little stunned. Are these all Hufflepuff's recipes? She was an excellent kitchen witch, John shrugged. It seems the other three founders decided these foods shouldn't appear on Hogwarts' dining tables. That's too much, Hannah exploded. How could they do this? Hannah, you should see what's inside, John said cautiously. More than 90% of the stuff in here violates the Magical Creatures Protection Act. Hannah peered into the cabinet, and the longer she looked, the more incredulous she became. The only things that looked even remotely fit for a table were potatoes and what the kitchen called Scottish fat-faced chickens, in other words, owls. No witch or wizard worth the name would eat an owl. Even a cruel dark wizard wouldn't treat those small messenger companions that way. Out of respect for the dignity of Hufflepuff's founder, the three of them agreed to keep the discovery to themselves. The large, enchanted cupboard, the grumpy head chef of the Midnight Kitchen, explained why the Chamber of Secrets had been opened. Someone who'd eat things like this must be in desperate need. Daphne was so furious at the implication she nearly set the kitchen on fire with her laurelwood wand. Still, the trip had not been wasted. Alongside the cookbook, John had come away with something more subtle. Inspiration. He'd seen how the Midnight Kitchen used emotion as an ingredient, and an idea began to form. The next night at the Constellation Society, John stood over a simmering cauldron, lost in thought. Hufflepuff uses emotion to guide a dish's effect, almost like brewing a potion, he muttered. He set the new cookbook aside and summoned a Patronus. A silver albatross of light burst forth and hovered in front of him. If I pour all my feelings into it, he wondered aloud, could it have different effects too? The albatross cocked its head, and John grinned. Then let's try it. He lowered his wand and looked at the bird. Go home for a bit and say goodnight to Ariana for me, will you? No problem, the albatross replied, and with a beat of silvery wings, it was gone. It crossed Britain and landed at the Wick household. Ariana was in bed listening to Mrs. Wick's bedtime stories, tales that included John's childhood pranks, like the time a 10-year-old John had used a pencil to frighten other kids until one of them wet himself. Ariana still wanted more stories when Mrs. Wick kissed her cheek and smoothed the covers. Will John come back? The child asked. That little rascal did come back last year, Mrs. Wick said, thinking. He's very busy in the magical world. Ariana replied, obedient and content. Mrs. Wick lingered in the doorway, smiling. Ariana glanced at the little bear on her bedside table. Good night, little bear. A ripple of silvery light answered. The bear leapt down and scurried to the window. Ariana blinked and saw an albatross perched there. For a moment she shrank back, dark mist gathering in the corners of her eyes, fear flaring. Then the bird spoke in John's voice. "John!" The mist vanished as if blown away. Ariana flew to the window and opened it. The albatross slipped inside and surveyed the room. "Looks like you've been having fun," John's voice said. "I won't make it back for Christmas, but I'll have your present ready. Don't forget to hang your stocking." The albatross's silver form melted briefly into a faceless human silhouette. The figure reached out and smoothed Ariana's hair. "If anything happens, write to me. I'm always here." With that, it reformed into birdlight and flew back out the window. When the Patronus returned to the Constellation Society, John saw it had become more than a simple charm. It had been filled with so much of his emotional energy that it felt a doppelganger, a store of his feelings made into a separate, acting self. He watched the silver image before him and thought it bore a certain Ravenclaw cleverness. "Can you use actual magic?" he asked. "Of course." The silvery version of John snapped its fingers and objects in the room floated into the air. "You could help a lot," John said, offering his hand. The Patronus double shrugged. Its light scattered and flowed back into John, melding with him. It left him with a strange, echoing sensation. "Your creativity is like Salazar's," John said, then turned as someone had appeared without him noticing, a woman in a centuries-old gown, golden hair falling about her shoulders. Her presence was warm and generous. "Helga Hufflepuff?" John said, glancing from her to the cookbook on the table. He laughed softly. Hufflepuff shook her head, pity and kindness in her eyes. "I never thought I'd meet such a pitiful child," she murmured. "Me?" John managed a brittle laugh. "I'm not pitiful." Hufflepuff reached out and touched his gaunt cheek. "You have been punished. Your sense of taste was taken." "That's a terrible punishment." John's smile fell. He was surprised she had noticed. He assumed he'd hidden it well. "I think Rowena knew too, though taste was never her measure." Hufflepuff's voice trembled with sympathy. "You've almost forgotten what food tastes like. It's a price I pay. An exchange that wasn't a losing deal," John said flatly. "I lost taste, but I gained friends." Hufflepuff knelt slightly, as if examining the soul of a child who had seen too much. "The entity that took your taste is powerful, but I came because I want you to taste good food again, to the best of my ability." John shook his head. "You know what's more terrifying than losing taste?" he asked. "Tasting delicious food again." Hufflepuff looked puzzled. "That taste would haunt me," he explained. "If I tasted something wonderful and then lost it again, I'd spend the rest of my life chasing that memory. I'd forget why I started. I'd risk losing myself." The founder's eyes shone. "You are so sensible it pains me." She was moved, but she was not fully corporeal like the portraits in the castle. "What have you been through?" "Battles, salvation, gains, losses," John said with a small smile. "All of it. That's life." Hufflepuff's face softened with approval. "Although our house motto is about treating everyone equally, I must say this. You are the most remarkable Hogwarts student I have ever seen." "You'd be liked in Slytherin for your ambition," John said. "Gryffindor would admire your courage to try the unknown," Hufflepuff continued. "Ravenclaw would envy your wisdom born of hardship. And I would admire your devotion and your tolerance for friends." As her form grew more ethereal, she revealed the cookbook tucked into the folds of her dress. It thudded to the table, and John picked it up. Recognition from the founders, a gift from Helga Hufflepuff herself. He let out a soft, incredulous laugh. He suspected he might be the first in 1,000 years to receive something like this. He decided the book would stay in the Constellation Society. Hufflepuff had wanted him to taste again, but he hadn't promised he would try. He slid the cookbook into a cabinet and let Hufflepuff's words settle. There was one absentee among the founders. Salazar Slytherin had not appeared. John wondered whether Slytherin's consciousness had been destroyed or merely gone elsewhere. Perhaps it had dissipated in the years Voldemort walked the earth, or perhaps John's own mixed blood kept him from meeting it. He touched his chin and thought of the Chamber of Secrets, of Voldemort's visits there, and of all the shadows left behind. For now, at least, Hufflepuff had come. The cookbook lay in his hands, and a new set of possibilities had just opened. Chapter 5 and 83. Zhou Wu, Star Spirit Guards for John. The question of whether to perform the ritual was no longer the hardest decision. The real problem was which creature's blood to add to the magic blood. So far, he had fused 6 magical bloodlines: dragon, demiguise, boggart, basilisk, phoenix, and the spirit of the Black Lake. The dragon had given him a powerful physical body. The demiguise had granted him foresight. The boggart brought fear and heightened perception. The basilisk let him carry death. The phoenix provided rebirth. The spirit of the Black Lake bestowed longevity bordering on immortality. Which blood should come next? He hesitated. His current abilities still had gaps. His apparition, for one, was clumsy. He needed to think it through. December came. Snow fell in thick sheets. This winter felt colder than most, and the white blanket covered large parts of Europe. In a Polish city, an old man with white hair and beard, wearing sunglasses, shoveled snow on his roof. Without warning, his neighbor's house exploded. He stared as a figure flew out, riding a broomstick into the sky. Over a dozen others appearing around the house vanished with a thunderous bang that sent snow sliding from the eaves. The old man took off his sunglasses and wiped them carefully, staring at the broom in his hand and wondering, for a moment, if he could fly. A wand waved in the air. His mind jolted, and he snapped back to his room. The television was on, rolling footage, reporters' voices. Multiple houses have experienced gas leaks. We remind the public to inspect gas pipelines regularly. Explosions echoed across the screen. Shouts, "For Grindelwald!" A saint was cornered. He let out a cry before his body was consumed by charms and he died. It was a swift, decisive arrest operation, an attempt to neutralize Grindelwald, who had once dominated Europe. They had prepared well, and Auror's amulet had blocked a saint's sneak attack. Nearly 100 muggles have been affected, the reporter said. The head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement reported on the operation. Grindelwald is still resisting stubbornly. The Polish Minister of Magic's voice was resolute. If we give up now, all our efforts will be for nothing. But the muggles. Arrange for obliviators, the minister cut in. I will coordinate with the muggle government about those involved. His gaze was hard and far-reaching. We are doing this not only for ourselves, but for the whole world. Grindelwald will drag the muggle world into war too. They will see what he is. The head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement could only stare. The spectacle had drawn alarm from the International Confederation of Wizards. Representatives from many countries had rushed to Poland to try to stop what they saw as radical action. Just as old Barty arrived, the head of the department burst in with urgent news. He's been caught. The room fell silent. A white-haired man, bound hand and foot, floated in. No one would forget the name that once swept across Europe, Grindelwald. The Polish minister took him in, a smile flitting across his lips and vanishing just as quickly. The drama had only just begun. Back in John's world, the choice remained. He considered the unicorn, the most sacred creature whose blood could strengthen the mind. He considered the Zhou Wu, a sacred beast reputed to grant traversal abilities, precisely what he desired. He considered the Akami, whose size-changing ability was tempting. He thought long and hard and chose what he needed most, the Zhou Wu. The other two he could still pursue later. Magic blood wasn't something he knew he could obtain after graduation, so he had to be cautious. Find a place to perform the ritual, he told himself. Danger never announced itself. John needed strength fast. He glanced at the experience bar for his magic and murmured, "It's almost there." A trip to the dark dimension had left him like a sponge dumped into a pool, greedily absorbing the energy around him. His experience climbed quickly. Reaching the 7th level, which might once have taken years, was suddenly within reach. If he made it, he would be among the most powerful wizards in the world. The title of Second King would no longer be aspirational. He walked into the Constellation Society and found 2 tiny golden figures wrestling on a round table. Around them, other golden figures cheered. The left figure kept retreating until it reached the edge, a cliff, and, with a childish roar, pushed its opponent, grabbed his arm, and threw him over its shoulder. The loser tumbled off the table, staggered to his feet, wavered, and collapsed again. The victor raised his arms in triumph, then was scooped up. Up close, John heard something new, a faint voice. "Just now, I didn't mishear," he said. He examined the golden figure. These constructs, created from runes, were beginning to vocalize. Before, they had not been able to make sound. "Open your mouth," he ordered. The figure obediently opened its tiny mouth. Inside, golden filaments like nerves threaded through its small head. Repeated training had changed them. John put the figure down and stroked his chin. He surveyed the pile of magical materials scattered through the Constellation Society and considered these little constructs. He had originally intended to use them as cores for protection. Their essence differed from typical magical creations like the crumple-horned snorkack. They lacked the energy to sustain themselves for long and might dissolve if away from the Constellation Society too long. They were formed from fused soul fragments and words. They had no bloodline, more like intelligent cores than living creatures. He let a golden figure stand in his palm and watched it nervously rub its hands. "I need to change you a little," he told it, "to truly become Wick's creations." The little figure tilted its head in incomprehension, but its meaning was clear enough to John. They just needed to obey. "From now on, you'll follow me. I'm going to give you a name." The figure jumped for joy. The others crowded over, desperate for the same honor. To be chosen by their creator was everything to them. John picked another from the pile, the one that had accompanied him last time, and the two small figures hopped onto his shoulders, ecstatic. Seeing the disappointed faces around them, John chuckled. "Come with me. I need to make you complete." Their disappointment turned to renewed energy. They lined up neatly and followed him through a door he opened. Beyond it lay a starry sky, one of the 9 doors spaces, the star body zone. Distant celestial bodies rotated slowly. Most were dim after the recent Hogwarts war. Earlier, they had flared into brilliant starlight to form the rainbow bridge that could block anything. John casually summoned a small celestial body and set a golden figure on it. One by one, more bodies descended. The golden figures, like children with beloved toys, climbed up and clung on. The bodies lifted, forming a ring around John. He reached into his small bag, took out a bottle of red blood, and poured it into the magic blood. He shook it carefully. Chapter 584. The blood inside the vial began to merge, finally coalescing into a large cat with an impossibly long tail. The beast shook its mane within the bottle, never still for a moment. "It really is quite similar," John chuckled, staring at the glass. The blood came from a Zhou Wu in the Forbidden Forest, and like its owner, it surged with vitality. "All right, come closer and drink." John brought the little golden figures and the celestial bodies nearer, while the pile of magical materials sat 5 meters away. He swallowed the magic blood in one gulp. The large cat surged into him, making his magic restless. A wave of energy rolled off him, wobbling the suspended celestial bodies and nearly toppling the tiny golden figures. Purple energy arced in his eyes as he drew his wand. "We can't waste this magic." He funneled the wild power into the white wand. A concentrated blast shot from its tip, striking the pile of materials. Silver skin crept up his right hand as he guided the celestial bodies to spread outward. "Star Spirit Guards, protect me." A bright purple light burst from his eyes and erupted as a shockwave, melting the magical components into a riot of colors. The shock touched the golden figures, and they cried out in surprise. Their tiny forms began to change. The figures shattered into golden runes that filled the sky. The molten materials flowed toward the runes, which sank into the masses and caused limbs to sprout. Golden veins became covered by bodies. The purple light shifted to silver, and a silvery white mist billowed from John. In the starry sky, shrouded by that mist, burly figures took shape one by one. Ding, magic blood effect ended. Obtain Jowu characteristic blessings. Agility, divine speed, shuttle, evasion. Agility, as agile and swift as a cat. Divine speed, greatly increased speed. Shuttle, teleportation portal, ignores distance limitations. Evasion, enhanced perception of danger. John didn't attend to the little fellows immediately. He stood very still, closed his eyes, and breathed quietly as the silvery mist, the essence of his soul, was reabsorbed and dissipated. When he opened his eyes, black energy mixed with silver, white, and purple flickered within them. "I didn't expect creating so many things at once would almost tear me apart." He wiggled his fingers. The mist had been his soul nearly exploding. Thankfully, there was no lasting damage this time. Last time, when he'd created something, His soul hadn't been endangered. This time he'd made over 50 at once. For the crumple-horned Snorkak, he'd focused on one creation. Dividing his attention among 50 had almost cost him. If not for his superior command of magic, he might have become one of the things he'd made. Fortunately, everything is fine. He wiped sweat from his brow, looked up at the dim starfield, and reached out to touch a nearby celestial body. It gleamed like a small moon, lighting the night. One by one, the golden figures stirred, and the scattered celestial bodies floated back into the sky. Seeing their bewildered expressions, John stroked his chin. I should leaven them up. Scales ran across his face and his body swelled. He let out a roar that shook the starry sky. The golden figures froze, then all grew larger. Sturdy antlers like a stag sprouted from their heads, their little bodies transforming into armored forms. Seeing this, John shrank back to human size and nodded in satisfaction. Now you can truly be called Star Spirit Guards. The newly formed Star Spirit Guards stared at their creator, scratching their heads in confusion at how John had become small again. Seeing the armored figures beside them threw them into further chaos. John covered his face. It seems you still need time to adapt. They already had a name, Star Spirit Guards. They could sustain themselves on starlight and needed no food. In their simplest Star Spirit state, they were golden figures, hopping and laughing like children. This form consumed the least energy. Their true Star Spirit Guard form wore white magical armor embroidered with gold-threaded patterns, runes that constantly negated external harm. The porcelain white armor could withstand attacks beyond their own strength. Black, dragon skin-like arms and golden blades on their shoulder pads, plus those large antlers that gathered magic to unleash powerful strikes. Star Spirit Guards were supremely resilient, especially against the dark arts, and their strength was formidable. In a magical world, creatures like these were nearly perfect. John found himself unable to look at them without a mixture of pride and exasperation. Two of the guards bumped their huge heads together and laughed goofily. Nearby, one had scooped up two of its kin and was tossing them like playthings. John buried his face in his hands. These star spirits had the minds of children. Their innocence was absolute. Then he spotted a white orb of light forming on a guard's antler. The orb flew at a celestial body, and the body burst like a firework. John's mouth twitched. All right, everyone stop. At his command, the mischief settled, and the star spirits fell into a somewhat chaotic attention. They were clumsy in their new sizes, bumping into each other and clashing antlers. Line up, John ordered. It took 3 full minutes to form a line. He knew they needed time to learn their bodies, so he waved and asked, Where are the two I picked earlier? 2 guards stepped forward. The differences between them were subtle, gold thread patterns, antler shape, hue, but distinct. John eyed the one whose chest bore a pattern like wisteria. I name you Hector. He then looked at the other, who was already shaping his arm into twin swords of magic. You are Hermes. Hector and Hermes jumped and danced with childish joy, though they seemed to forget their current proportions whenever they leapt. After a few chaotic hops, they reverted to their star spirit forms. They would need practice to master transformations. John couldn't shrink and intimidate them every time. Hector and Hermes became his personal guards while he tidied the celestial area. The rest of the newly transformed star spirits scampered off to play through other doors. Fusing with the Jowu bloodline had granted John long-desired abilities. He traced the empty air with a finger, and a golden tear split the space, opening a portal that led straight to Hagrid's hut. This shuttle ignored Hogwarts' unplottable wards. The 2 little tails that trailed behind the star spirits wagged as they followed him through. Fly! Hector pointed at a crow and said something. Hermes muttered, Bird. John listened. It wasn't English. It sounded like childlike babble, a star spirit language. The 2 of them chattered on, excited and incessant. Hagrid was out in the Forbidden Forest, hauling a Christmas tree for the castle. He paused, puzzled. I thought I heard something. You heard right, John said, striding over and glancing at the tree. Every year, Hagrid handled this duty, and that hadn't changed since John became a professor. How many more trees? We need 12, and this is the 7th, Hagrid replied. I was getting there. No need. I can do it myself. Merlin's beard. Hagrid started to refuse. then froze as the two little fellows suddenly burst into their 8-foot-tall armored forms. White light washed over them, giving them a sacred, awe-inspiring presence. Hagrid was speechless. "What are these?" John shrugged and let a crooked smile show. "As I said, guards, Star Spirit Guards. The good news is they don't consume magic," John added. "They feed on starlight." "Good heavens, you do keep surprising me," Hagrid said, still stunned. "This is the second thing this year to keep me awake. The first was you killing Lord Voldemort." Hector and Hermes stepped into the Forbidden Forest and returned, each hauling 2 trees. John grinned. "Magic-serving wizards," he said. After helping Hagrid bring the trees into the castle, John had the Star Spirit Guards slip back into their small Star Spirit forms. The little fellows tucked themselves into John's pocket, peeking out at the basil that glared at them with fierce interest. Chapter 585. "You made this?" Malfoy asked in surprise. "It looks as fragile as a puffskein." Puffskeins were fluffy, child-favorite creatures, cute to look at but useless in any real fight. John sighed. "They might look that way, Draco, but one good hit from a Star Spirit Guard can knock you out for 3 days. He stopped Malfoy from poking Hermes with a fork. The little creature looked harmless, but it packed a surprising amount of strength. Tomorrow was the start of the Christmas holidays, and Malfoy was preparing to leave Hogwarts for a romantic trip to France with Astoria. Daphne, however, thought her sister was going to Chelsea with her to study cooking. She had heard about a chef named Ramsay. Neville planned to spend the break with his family and make up for time missed while his parents had been away. "All right, but I need to give you all a task," John said. He was back at Hogwarts alone again. "Help me train the Star Spirit Guards. Each of you take 1 with you." The Star Spirit Guards were still young and couldn't transform on their own. They needed training and supervision. John intended to have his friends help, and also to send a few of the guards to branches in France and America. The members of the Constellation Society had no objections, but when John looked at Malfoy, he couldn't hide his concern. Would the Star Spirits pick up bad habits from him? Perhaps John's skepticism was too obvious. Malfoy bristled. "Who do you think you're insulting?" Draco snapped. "I have a natural talent for teaching." "Fine," John said with a worried sigh. Malfoy was affronted. Astoria even hesitated. "Does Draco really have to train them, John?" "There aren't enough of us to do this without help," John said. "I can't manage them all alone." Malfoy was outraged that even his girlfriend doubted him. He swore he'd make John regret underestimating him. A single Star Spirit Guard? He would turn it into the best one. He believed, stubbornly, that he could do it. That optimism lasted until he visited the Constellation Society and watched one of Little Star Spirits, after transforming, punch a stone taller than itself into rubble. Draco's plans to teach vanished into a single, horrifying thought. How could he avoid being killed by one of those punches? Astoria, for her part, adored the cute little creature. Despite the Star Spirit Guard's fearsome power, it was deceptively charming. That night, John didn't go back to his dormitory. He stayed at the Constellation Society, checking each star spirit to make sure those golden, fluffy beings wouldn't suddenly maim his friends. Ding. Magic power upgraded successfully. Current magic power. John let out a breath that flickered purple before blooming into a small fireball. His eyes glazed as he called up the panel. The next level was grayed out, no joyous fanfare at the edge of his vision. "A bottleneck," he muttered. Level 7 stared back at him. He felt the familiar ache of limits. To push further, was the Elder Wand his only hope? He needed another way to keep progressing. Even standing near the pinnacle of the wizarding world, John wasn't satisfied. He knew there were forces beyond mere level 7. Breaking through this ceiling would let him transcend, and if he remained trapped, he might end up like the other legendary figures, the ones who'd risen too far or been consumed by their reach, the Grindelwalds and Dumbledores of the world. Chapter 601, Christmas Gift, Watson Left Behind. The castle bustled with departures. Malfoy, a star spirit tucked into his pocket, waved at John from a thestral carriage as it pulled toward the train. John watched the crowds thin and felt older somehow, left behind. People traveled in pairs and groups. He stood alone in the foyer. Filch was counting the students leaving. Professor McGonagall approached, puzzled. "You're not going this year, Wick?" I have things to take care of, Professor, John answered respectfully. I can't leave. You could spend some time with your family, McGonagall said, disapproving. You always push yourself too hard. John had only gone home once for Christmas. Compared to others, Harry, who had gone more than once, he was a child who seemed to have lost a family to devote himself to duty. McGonagall felt sorry for him. I'd rather make sure the people I care about are safe than take a brief rest, John said. I'm still young. Time passes, McGonagall replied with a wry smile. In the blink of an eye, I'm an old woman. You are a noble old woman, John said, bowing. I've always respected you. She smiled back. She couldn't help liking him. Hogsmeade will be open if you change your mind, she said, then nodded and left. She was going with the train to the Silverhand amusement park, an irresistible draw for the adventure-loving Gryffindors. As usual, Slughorn had arranged a Christmas party. Snow lay thick on the castle. John watched it fall, thinking, peace is hard won. This year, the students were especially lucky to be able to leave freely. The earlier years had been full of trouble. First-year trolls, second-year basilisk, third-year Sirius's problems, the Triwizard Tournament, oppressive rules in the fifth year, the hairline battles of the sixth. Without Lord Voldemort upsetting everything, this Christmas felt unusually calm. Snowflakes landed on Hector's head. He was seeing snow for the first time, and he and Hermes rolled around in it. Maybe we can celebrate differently this year, John mused. Peace was always worth fighting for. Wartime blood made the flowers of peace all the more fragrant. But John couldn't relax yet. Between training the Star Spirit Guards and researching better treatments for the blood curse, he barely left the Constellation Society. Even Slughorn hardly saw him during meals. When Christmas Day arrived, John stepped out of the Constellation Society and stretched, rubbing his stiff neck. Basil had brought the morning paper. He picked it up out of habit. The headline caught his eye. Grindelwald captured, imprisoned in Poland. John frowned. Grindelwald's capture was not a simple cause for celebration. That man belonged behind bars and would have been at home in a cell. Perhaps straightforward execution would have been the right choice, John muttered, then shook his head. That was impossible now. Grindelwald had followers, and any hasty measure would create a martyr. If the Polish Minister of Magic had ordered such an execution, they would have hailed him as a hero. He went back to his dormitory, uncertain what the holidays would bring him. As he left, the star spirits of the Constellation Society scattered through the rooms, products of the society, but not bound to it. One star spirit found a doorway to an ocean room, seized a large fish, and rode it like a surfboard. Others explored a forest room and played hide-and-seek through the maze. The little creatures seemed to have boundless joy. Blue flames suddenly flickered to life in a fireplace. Ariana woke in the soft light of morning. The little stuffed bear on her bedside table waved a fluffy paw, providing the cutest wake-up service. Her golden hair was mussed from sleep. She sat up, rubbed her eyes, and then scrambled out of bed and ran downstairs. The bear trotted behind her, tiny legs pumping. Mrs. Wick was already in the kitchen, preparing breakfast. Ariana barely glanced at the poured milk on the table. She had a clear mission. 5 neatly wrapped presents sat beneath the Christmas tree. "Can I open them, Mom?" Ariana asked, eyes wide. Mrs. Wick smiled at her daughter's eagerness, raised a finger, and wagged it. "Go wash first." Ariana dashed off to clean up. Watson padded downstairs, yawning. Mrs. Wick narrowed her eyes at his disheveled appearance. "What time did you stay up until last night? Reading that I wield a greatsword at Hogwarts book again?" Watson looked sheepish. He'd told his wife he had work to do, but in truth he'd spent the entire night in the study reading. He couldn't help it. Lockhart's writing was addictive. And the edition John had given him was a special one, with moving illustrations that brought the scenes to life. Chapter 586. It was like watching a movie, and Watson was transfixed. Seeing Mrs. Wick's dangerous look, he grabbed the comb from the sofa and said, "I'll help Ariana with her hair." Mrs. Wick laughed in exasperation, certain Watson would be up all night. In the washroom, Ariana wrinkled her nose as she brushed her teeth. She followed the steps John had taught her, washing her face carefully and splashing warm water on her small cheeks. Just as she was about to open presents, Watson, using Ariana to avoid more questions, pulled her over to sit and combed through her messy hair until it shone. At last, she could open gifts. Ariana sat barefoot under the Christmas tree. Kiki, the big-headed gray owl, fluttered over. A little bear carried a package, and without any prompting, Ariana tore off the paper. Inside was a small bear doll in a pink bonnet, Watson's gift. Watson sipped his coffee and boasted to Mrs. Wick, "I bet she'll like mine best." He was brimming with confidence until the bear he'd chosen so carefully was tossed aside. Watson froze. Mrs. Wick scoffed. "She already has a little bear, and you give her the same one?" "I thought it might keep the other one company," Watson mumbled, crestfallen. He'd even asked Greg, the orphanage administrator, for advice. Mrs. Wick rolled her eyes. "You need to figure out what girls actually like." Ariana unwrapped the next present. She pulled out a beautiful dress and tried it on. She looked every bit a princess. After a moment's thought, she shrugged and flung the dress onto the sofa. Mrs. Wick set her cup down without expression and, glancing at Watson, who was barely keeping a laugh in, said, "Go shovel the snow at the door." "I just shoveled it yesterday," Watson protested. "You ate yesterday, so you're not eating today?" Mrs. Wick shot back. Faced with the threat of being cut off, Watson resignedly went outside with a shovel. Ariana opened a third gift. At the sight of something cold and metallic, Mrs. Wick smiled and closed the box. "Little white flower, you still have 2 gifts," she said, taking the box away. It made a faint metallic clink. Ariana blinked and opened the 4th gift. This one was normal, a beautiful emerald brooch and a card stamped with the constellation symbol. On the back, in neat handwriting, were the words, "I opened the passage in the fire." It was John's gift. Ariana cradled the brooch like a treasure, but she didn't trust keeping it on her. She ran to her room and hid it under her bed. After Mrs. Wick boxed up the presents from her side of the family and came back out, she saw Ariana rush down the stairs. Just as she was about to ask about John's gift, she saw Ariana throw the card into the fireplace. The flames flared blue. Mrs. Wick walked over, eyes widening in the same surprised rhythm as Ariana's. "Go find John," Ariana said. Mrs. Wick thought for a heartbeat, then nodded. Hand in hand, mother and daughter stepped into the fireplace. As the flames swallowed them, the hearth's color slowly returned to normal. Watson came back inside, snow still in his hair. "The snow's gotten heavier outside," he called. "I'll clear it later." No one answered. Only Kiki blinked. Watson stared at the owl in growing alarm. "Where are my wife and child?" Chapter 602, Ariana, Hogsmeade. At Hogwarts, John had nearly been buried in presents piled in his dormitory, so many packages that he could barely get in the door. He picked up a box at random and opened it. A pink gift made him raise an eyebrow. Basil, his territorial owl, flew in trembling with fury. Apparently other owls had encroached while he was away. John calmed him with a dozen dried fish. If Basil had been on duty earlier, those intruders would never have dared. "I'll have to find time to open all of these later," John said. "Hopefully my uncles didn't send anything that explodes." After a quick meal alone in the Great Hall, water and bread, John checked his pocket watch. Ariana should be awake and opening gifts by now. A door appeared behind him. He turned and saw his mother. "Mom?" he said, surprised. Mrs. Wick was flanked by a scattering of little constellations that parted at her wave. Ariana was peeking out from behind her. "I needed to protect my daughter from being taken to some strange place," Mrs. Wick said, as if that explained everything. "If you wanted to come, just say so," John thought, but couldn't bring himself to scold his mother. Mrs. Wick winked at him. "No, I quite like Christmas here." John was unmoved by his mother's theatrical charm, but he had to admit it was good to see them. Except where was his father? Back home, Watson had searched every room and still found no sign of his wife or daughter. He grabbed Kiki's wing, more in panic than hope. "Where are my wife and child?" Kiki could not answer, but Watson noticed a card spat out from the hearth and recognized his son's handwriting at a glance. "They went to see John behind my back." Watson felt betrayed by the magical world and by his family's secrecy. He dressed quickly, pulling on a tailor-made wizard's robe and hat. Something was missing: his wand. He hunted through his storage room, found the wand that had been chewed on by Tom and then hidden by an irresponsible parent, and brandished it in front of the mirror. "You do look like a wizard," he told his reflection. Proudly equipped, he swaggered to the fireplace and threw the card into the flames. The paper caught and burned to ash. He reached out, and a lick of blue fire touched his hand. He jerked it away. "That goes through?" he muttered, incredulous. He fed a log into the hearth. The flames roared brighter. Realization dawned. He had been left behind. Ungrateful children. Watson gritted his teeth. They'd slipped into the magical world without him. Furious, he waved his wand in the wick house, casting about like a madman. He stormed out of the house, barreling into the snowman he'd built the day before, and starting to punch and kick at it. The monitoring special agents exchanged uneasy glances. "Is he losing it?" the younger agent whispered. "I think he's under too much pressure," the other suggested. The old agent watched him calmly. "Or he's putting on a show to make us drop our guard." "That makes sense." The young agent admired the deduction. The old man lit a cigarette and said dryly, "As expected of you, Watson Wick. You saw us long ago, didn't you?" "Good acting, but you can't fool me." The old agent sneered. "That's enough." "Enough? We're supposed to be monitoring him." The younger man looked bewildered. "It's useless. He's already spotted us. Everything we'll see from now on will be exactly what he wants us to see." The old agent's voice was cold. "Consider this his victory. Let's leave. Otherwise, we'll never see the real Watson Wick." "All right." The young agent, convinced by his senior, trusted him without question. He didn't know the truth behind the old man's cool detachment. A jaded heart, abandoned by his family, had hardened him into someone who could walk away. Hogsmeade. Madam Wick's fingers itched as she stepped into the wizarding village, an instinct she couldn't explain, a lingering echo of darker times, traces left in the bloodline by a long-past witch hunt. Ariana's eyes swept over the quaint storefronts with careful interest. She walked through the village, cradling a small stuffed bear, John's Christmas gift, a novelty for her. John had stayed away from home, but had arranged for Ariana to come. He removed the restrictive bracelet she'd been wearing, waved his wand over it, and murmured, "I'm here." With John beside her, Ariana no longer needed the bracelet's constraints. Madam Wick was drawn into spick-and-span wizarding wear. She thought Ariana could use a few new robes. John noticed the winter crowds and the odd popularity of ice cream in the cold, perhaps the wizarding version of eating hot pot in summer. He spotted Filch at a stall, pulling a Florian Fortescue membership card, taking out 2 strawberry mapo tofu-flavored ice creams. Filch ate one and handed the other to Madame Pince, and the two chatted and laughed. Even Filch's habitual stoop seemed to ease. John made a note to keep that to himself. "Would you like a warm butterbeer?" John asked, pointing toward the 3 broomsticks. Ariana peered into the packed pub and, uncomfortable in the crowd, took a nervous step back. At that moment, the owner of Spick and Span hurried over and bowed to John. "Your mother bought 13 ladies' robes," he said. John produced a small coin purse and handed it over. "Make my mother happy," he said. The owner's hand trembled as he took the bag. Money had that effect. He beamed until his eyes nearly vanished in a smile, nodding his assurances of excellent service. Seeing Ariana shrink from the crowded pub, John thought for a moment and then said, "Let's go somewhere quieter. I think you'll like this place." Ariana cocked her head, unsure where he was leading her. Hogshead Inn. Compared with the 3 broomsticks, it was the sort of disreputable hole that smelled of stale ale and old regret, more like a slums dive than a cheerful tavern. In the near-empty room, a goat bleated as it trotted by. Aberforth sat propping his chin, bored and increasingly worried. Since Voldemort's fall, the darker regulars had disappeared. If business didn't pick up, he might have to close his doors. The bell jingled as the door opened. Aberforth glanced over, expecting some dark wizard come for a discreet deal. But when he saw them, he felt as if someone had cast Petrificus Totalis. His eyes widened until they almost popped out, and a strangled sound escaped him. "Not welcome?" John asked softly at the doorway. Aberforth's gaze fixed on the girl behind him, a child holding a wand, blinking curiously at the quiet pub. He could barely force the name out. "Ariana." The calm in his voice cracked and became a choked sob. Ariana looked at the old man and felt a rusty thread of recognition pull taut. She answered in a voice Aberforth hadn't heard in years, but could never forget. "Brother." Chapter 603, Killing Grindelwald, Campaigning. How should we handle him? Poland's Ministry of Magic stank of tension after Grindelwald's capture. Some celebrated, others fretted. The International Confederation of Wizards was circling for surveillance rights. Every nation wanted a piece of the prize. Grindelwald had once stirred a revolution across Europe. His name still carried fear and political currency. With the Confederation's election looming, the advantages of controlling Grindelwald were enormous. Grim, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement in Poland, paced the office, worry etched into his face. No prison can hold Grindelwald forever. He is a ghost. Wherever we put him, he will become a cradle for his influence. Grim was over 70. His youth had overlapped with Grindelwald's time in power. He knew all too well what the dark wizard could inspire. He thought of the Macusa's earlier handling. Imprisoning Grindelwald had boosted America's prestige, only for Grindelwald to escape later. Grim feared a repeat. "We must consider this carefully, Minister," he urged. "That's not a blessing. It's a nightmare," the Polish minister said. "Grim, are you afraid?" the minister, Ing, asked with a wry chuckle. Grim's reply was grim. "There is no cage that can hold Grindelwald. We simply do not have that capability." "You still speak of him with respect?" Ing straightened Grim's tie with a low, reproachful voice. "You're acting like one of his followers." "I once admired him," Grim admitted. "But Dumbledore showed me the truth. Grindelwald's revolution was built on selfishness and danger." Ing's hand faltered. He lowered Grim's tie and smiled faintly. "I understand your fear, but fear is no excuse to flee our duty." He moved toward the office's moving painting of a windmill and watched it turn slowly. "We cannot shirk responsibility simply because we're afraid. He is not political capital for your re-election." Grim tore off his tie in frustration. "You want to use him to boost your campaign." Ing listened, then stepped closer. "Are we not already in an abyss?" he asked softly. "Corruption, starving citizens, tax evasion. The ministry can barely pay salaries. Tell me, Grim, did your integrity make you comfortable here?" "No, I survived because of what my family left me," Grim shot back. "Exactly." Ing's voice was sharp. "Everyone who enters the ministry thinks less about saving society than about grabbing another rotten piece of it to stuff into their own mouths." With each step Ing took forward, Grim retreated. Anger gave way to stunned silence as Ing's words sank in. "Tell me, are we not already in the abyss?" Grim realized there was no easy retreat. He looked at a colleague he no longer recognized and asked, voice trembling, "What do you intend to do?" "I want to change things," Ing said, each word deliberate. "Starting by killing Grindelwald." "Killing Grindelwald?" Grim gasped. "You can't." "Why not?" Ing pointed at the broader world beyond the ministry windows. "Look at what he has already done." "Are you saying we can exempt him from legal process just because he's Grindelwald?" "The International Confederation will not agree to a summary execution," Grim warned. Every ministry and ambassador wanted the glory and control that came with Grindelwald's capture. "But my people will agree," Ing replied, looking Grim straight in the eye. "I won't wait for history to repeat itself before I act." "But Dumbledore." Grim struggled with the name. Dumbledore had once loved and failed with Grindelwald. The very mention hung heavy in the room. "I will execute him myself," the minister said finally, then added, colder and louder, "I will kill him in front of everyone." Grim watched his back, the complex emotions in his face unspooling. For a moment, Ing seemed like a lone, stubborn crusader, ready to risk everything for the greater good. Grim had once looked down on the minister, thinking that capturing Grindelwald would bring more trouble than relief. But Ing's words had stuck with him. After leaving the ministry, Grim went to the Wizarding Marketplace, a place far less prosperous than Britain's Diagon Alley, less quaint than France's hidden quarters, scarred by the war that had shocked the Muggle world half a century ago. Crumbled buildings and empty storefronts were a constant reminder of that violence. The battle had not only harmed Muggles, it had devastated the magical community too. Grim's youthful faith in wizards ruling over Muggles had long since collapsed. Under the current might of the non-magical world, the wizarding world was barely clinging on. Chapter 588. Compared with the dilapidated, last-century buildings around it, the beautiful, luxurious Gringotts looked wildly out of place. "He's right," Grim murmured, standing in the middle of the road looking around. "We need to change." This was another session of the International Confederation of Wizards, held on Christmas. Old Barty glanced at his pocket watch. The item has already been sent by Owl. Thank you, Pierce. Piers Polkiss sat nearby. He had been fortunate. Once controlled, he had nevertheless been kept alive because the other side still needed to use his identity. When the Aurors had found him, he was asleep in a cellar clutching a bottle of old wine. His presence at this meeting signaled that Old Barty intended to take him under his wing. Pierce hesitated, then asked, "Minister, you could obviously put your son in the ministry, so why let him waste his time?" Old Barty sighed. "He'll be fine at Silver Hand." Pierce opened his mouth, but closed it again. He understood. Old Barty owed something to that family. He could not bear to be harsh. Even this gift had been sent through Pierce. The Minister of Magic's duties kept Old Barty away from Nocturne Alley, but as a father, he had been haunted by responsibility and emptiness once he tasted power. "This will probably be the last council meeting," he said quietly, looking at the other ministers. "Germany wants Grindelwald extradited. America wants something from Grindelwald. The British ministry should intervene." It was, in part, a way to give Dumbledore some face. But Old Barty fell silent and fixed his gaze on the Polish Minister of Magic. The Polish minister cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, looking at the two ministers in the middle of a heated argument, "we are arguing over where to imprison him. I think the real issue is the alarming rumor spreading through Europe." "Simple," the American snapped. "Lock him up in America. Our security is the strictest." "Nonsense," the German retorted. "Grindelwald is connected to the disappearance of our Minister of Magic. We need him to confess." The bickering rose again, until the Polish minister raised a hand to silence them and looked toward the door. Two Aurors escorted Grindelwald in. He knelt, then floated to the center of the hall. He looked up at the Polish minister. The minister stepped down from the dais and asked, "Why are we discussing where to imprison him? What he has done violates our most sacred laws. Are we going to turn a blind eye to this disaster? When did a criminal become a bargaining chip?" The representatives fell silent. Then the Polish minister said plainly, "Let me tell you the truth." Grimm stepped forward and handed his wand to the Polish minister. The wand gleamed in his hand. Murmurs rippled through the hall. "Ing, what are you doing?" someone called. "Put the wand down," another shouted. "This is an affront to the law. He belongs back in Germany for trial." The Polish minister raised a finger to quiet them. "You are afraid," he said calmly. "Afraid of his followers, afraid of another power. Since that is the case, let those who are not afraid come forward." He pointed the wand at Grindelwald. Fear flashed in Grindelwald's eyes, but he could not speak. Avada Kedavra. A green light flashed. The silence of death rolled through the hall. "What are you doing?" the German representative barked, staring at the fallen body and at the Polish minister. "You've taken a life in front of everyone with an unforgivable curse. This is an unforgivable crime." The Polish minister handed the wand back to Grimm and, facing the accusations of the assembly, made no attempt to defend himself. "Yes," he said simply, "I am guilty." Voices clamored for his arrest. He ignored them. "My crime," he went on, "is that I could not bear to watch my people suffer. My crime is my love for this land beneath my feet. My crime is that I did not kill this demon sooner, that I allowed my people to be attacked. My crime is standing up when everyone else fled." He walked toward the door, and the members of the Polish delegation clustered around him. An Auror stepped forward, wand raised, but the minister held out his hands in calm surrender. "Arrest me, Auror." The Auror hesitated, breath trembling. "Do your duty," the minister urged loudly. The Auror lowered his wand and dropped it. The Polish minister moved to the next Auror and repeated the plea. "I trust you, minister." That Auror dropped his wand too. Then the third, the fourth. The weapons clattered to the floor. The foreign ministers filed out to the doorway and saw their colleagues from Poland standing defiantly around their minister. Grimm, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, walked forward with the wand that had killed Grindelwald. Everyone expected him to make an arrest. Instead, he did something unexpected. He snapped the wand in two, flung the pieces aside. He took the Polish minister's hand and smiled. "I cannot arrest a hero." He stood with his back to the minister, creating a clear division. On the steps, the delegates of many nations. Below them, the united staff of the Polish ministry. The scene was photographed. The images spread across newspapers and through the magical world within hours. In that instant, the name Ing Griffiths, the man who had killed the Dark Lord, became known everywhere. Some condemned the ministry's apparent cowardice, accusing them of ignoring Grindelwald's crimes for fear of another power. Others sympathized with Poland's long suffering. Countless people praised Ing Griffiths for his courage. He had spoken for an old, unfair magical order. Old Barty watched the Polish minister closely. His intuition told him the matter was not that simple. He leaned toward Rippy Kabayer, the hero who had once infiltrated Voldemort's ranks and helped clear Barty's name. "Rippy," he whispered, "check Grindelwald's body." "Minister, are you sure?" Rippy asked. "Grindelwald won't die that easily," old Barty replied. While everyone's attention remained outside, Rippy slipped back into the hall. Grindelwald's face was pale and still. Rippy drew his wand, Specialis Revelio. The revealing charm changed nothing about the corpse, but a scar appeared on Grindelwald's finger in the spell's glow. Rippy froze, intending to examine it more closely. "Please step away from him," a tall Auror said from the doorway. Several Aurors clustered around, faces cold and their hands on their wands. Rippy flashed a quick smile, calculating friend and foe. "Don't get excited," he said. "I'm just curious." "There's nothing to be curious about," the tall Auror sneered. "This is Grindelwald, isn't it?" "That is Grindelwald," Rippy agreed and stepped back as they moved the body. From the doorway, someone muttered, "Only those who don't believe him will question him." Chapter 589. The tall Auror said coldly, "We're not fools." "Fools?" Rippy glanced at him and replied evenly, "What a coincidence. Your raid was very well timed. Every country has been on Grindelwald's trail. He's like a ghost, never caught," the Auror said. "We have our own intelligence." The tall Auror met Rippy's eyes. "We prefer to act, to restore magic's glory." Rippy opened his mouth to ask more, but the Auror cut him off, displeasure in his stare. "Leave. Your companion is outside." "Fine, I understand." Rippy nodded and walked out. Only after he had gone did the Auror turn and go back inside. The post-Grindelwald summit had concluded. Their primary targets had slipped away, so there was no reason to linger. Old Barty moved through the wizarding quarter in Poland, frowning at the devastation around him. "It looks like a slum," Pierce said in disbelief. "That Muggle war hit them hard," old Barty said, already well informed. "Add in corruption afterward, and they've never recovered." Pierce's expression changed as he understood the Polish Minister of Magic a little better. The damage Grindelwald had done only worsened an already fragile situation. Rippy returned, and old Barty asked, "Any change?" "I used the revealing spell. Nothing obvious came up. But one thing, I noticed Grindelwald has a scar on his finger," Rippy whispered. Old Barty nodded. He glanced toward the Auror who had been following them. "Let's go." Later, in the minister's office, the tall Auror reported Rippy's discovery. He might have seen something. "Deal with him?" the minister asked. "Not yet," the Auror decided. "Leave him for now." Alone in his room, Grindelwald reverted back to his usual appearance and stood before a painting of a windmill, studying it. "Why choose this place?" the tall Auror asked, puzzled. Grindelwald looked at him with intent and said, "Yoel taught me a principle. Only the strong are worth following. The smaller and weaker a people are, the more they yearn for greatness. They've been crushed to the dust. I can make them great," he murmured. He drew the elder wand and whispered, "Survival of the fittest. The strong survive. Might makes right. I saw my own failure," he added, "so I chose another way." The windmill painting, at first glance a simple piece of art, concealed a copy of the Statute of Secrecy. Grindelwald's aim had not changed. Wizards living openly, magic restored to its rightful place. But his method had shifted. This time, he would let the law of the fittest take its course, sacrifice a few to awaken the many. "This time, I see far enough, Yoel," he said to the memory of his teacher. Hogshead Inn. 3 of them sat facing one another. 2 small star-like spirits dangled from the goat-headed sign like ornaments, swinging gently. "Wipe this down," John barked, bluntly gesturing at the table. Aberforth bristled, about to answer angrily, then noticed Ariana poking at something on the table, some sticky smear, or perhaps someone's snot. She also picked out a tooth that had been lodged in a pillar during a previous scuffle and held it up with shy curiosity. Aberforth shuffled to the bar, pulled out a rag that had not been washed in ages, and cast a cleaning charm. The cloth sighed and returned to a faded yellow. Yellow might not have been its original color either, but he set to work anyway, scrubbing the table until it shone. When John pointed to the stool, Aberforth scowled, but wiped that clean too. John tested it with his hand before taking a seat. "What would you like to drink?" Aberforth asked. "Do you have butterbeer?" John asked, glancing at Ariana. "Hot, please." Aberforth didn't argue. He ducked into the back room and fussed around. He emerged with 2 cups of butterbeer that looked as if they'd just been taken from the cupboard, surprisingly neat for the hog's head. Ariana watched Aberforth with curiosity. He avoided her eyes and kept to the counter. John took a sip. The temperature was perfect, but he set the cup down after one taste. Its flavor didn't tempt him. Ariana lifted the cup and drank more slowly. John glanced at Aberforth, who had kept his distance, and said casually, "Yes, it's her." Ariana looked from John to Aberforth, wondering what John meant. "Didn't he tell you?" John said. "I have a talent for legilimency." "That's not surprising," he added, almost offhand. "Your mind is transparent as glass at the moment." Aberforth fell silent for a long beat, then asked hoarsely, "How did you?" John shrugged. "You'd be better off not knowing." "I don't want Ariana to feel alone," John said, looking directly at Aberforth. "You're her brother. She has a right to know." "Brother?" Ariana blinked, surprised. That familiar title, once owned by Aberforth, now seemed to belong to John. Aberforth asked, voice tight, "Is she all right?" "She's getting better." John stood, took Ariana's hand, and stepped closer to Aberforth. "Her name now is Ariana Dumbledore Wick." "That's good," Aberforth said, lowering his eyes. "Better than being left to us." Aberforth's thoughts surged. Seeing Ariana again had undone him. His outward bluntness had always been a mask. John shook his head. "You were once her favorite brother," he said softly, "even if a failed one." Aberforth made no attempt to retort. He looked at John, steady. "I don't want you to bring her back to us." "Both of us have failed as brothers," John replied. "But with Ariana at my side, she gets better." Since Ariana had arrived, Aberforth had been watching closely. She was brighter now, more in control. The frightening power that had once haunted her lay buried within, contained. "I won't chain her," John went on. "Where she goes will be her choice. One day she'll fly, soar, and I will clear the obstacles in her path." Aberforth drew a long, shaking breath. "Thank you." John's rescue of Ariana, then allowing the broken brother a meeting, was mercy beyond what Aberforth had hoped for. "I'm willing to serve you," Aberforth said, voice rough. John waved it off. "I don't use family as leverage." He released Ariana's hand and told her, plainly, "I think you'll like him, Aberforth Dumbledore." At the sound of the name, Ariana stirred. She stepped out from behind John and searched for her brother behind that familiar face, but found only the stranger who stood before her. She smiled anyway. "You showed me his painting, like great-grandfather used to," she said. "I have more paintings I haven't shown you," Aberforth replied earnestly. "Ariana?" He held out his hand. Ariana hesitated a moment, then placed her small hand in his. Together they walked to the door behind the counter. Before she left, Ariana looked back. "Will you wait for me, brother?" John's smile was steady. "I'll always be here." Comforted, Ariana went inside with Aberforth. Behind the counter were countless canvases, paintings Aberforth had made over a century of guilt. If he'd been a muggle, he might have been a painter, he thought. When the butterbeer had a moment to cool, Ariana reemerged. John took her hand, preparing to seek Mrs. Wick. At the door, Ariana waved. "Goodbye, brother." Aberforth waved back. He sat down hard at the bar and stayed there long after their figures had vanished, dazed and steeped in the unexpected joy of her return. "Hogwarts, the king," he muttered to himself, staring at the now lukewarm butterbeer. He understood then why the child could become a king admired by so many. "Not using family as leverage," he said under his breath. "Wick is where you belong, Ariana." He had already lost, yet in that loss was something softer, almost like peace. Aberforth saw, in his sister, a trust in John, and in the second king, a tenderness that surprised him. "Albus, you're wrong. This child was meant to be king." Aberforth stared at the broken mirror and left only those words behind. When John found Mrs. Wick, she immediately set about pulling Ariana into 1,000 outfits to try on. Ariana glanced at John, silently begging him to rescue her from the fuss, but he turned his head away. In the end, Wick walked away with a huge stack of novelty wizarding clothes, and the outing was over. On the way back to Hogwarts, they ran into Professor Slughorn. "Oh, Mrs. Wick," he said, surprised to see her at the school, but as ever effusive. "Care to come in for a drink? There isn't enough food upstairs, so I came down to the kitchens to fetch some." The hedonistic professor would never give up his comforts. Mrs. Wick shot a look toward John. He understood and smiled. "Sorry, Professor. My mother still needs to take my sister home." "Is that so?" Slughorn replied, catching sight of Ariana. "Then I won't keep my guests waiting." He excused himself and slipped away. Mrs. Wick, puzzled, said, "I thought your headmaster was an old man with a white beard?" "Oh, he retired to be a doorman." John tapped the wall beside them. A door shimmered into being. He opened it and stepped through, Mrs. Wick and Ariana following. The door shut and vanished behind them. Slughorn, coming out from the kitchens to talk to John about his thesis on the blood curse, found the corridor empty. He swirled the wine in his glass, sipped, and muttered to himself, "I must have had too much to drink." He hesitated, looked at the glass, and drained it. At home, Mrs. Wick and Ariana apparated into the parlor and found Watson sprawled on the sofa in a wizarding robe. His tone when he asked where they'd been was less than pleasant. Mrs. Wick set the robe down and, in the gentlest voice she could manage, said, "Didn't I tell you not to track snow onto the carpet?" Watson glanced at the carpet, straightened himself, sat up properly, and answered, I don't want what you think. I want what I say," Mrs. Wick cut in, unexpectedly domineering. Watson, chastened, went outside to shovel snow with none of his earlier hauteur. Later that evening, he discovered a present Mrs. Wick had left for him, a genuine wizarding robe. He rushed to his room, half embarrassed, half delighted. "You still love me," he told her shyly. "No need to say more. Thank you for the Christmas gift." What he didn't know was that it had come from a shop running a buy 10, get 1 free promotion. Ariana, in her room, had taken out an emerald green brooch and was happily rolling on the bed with it. Her little bear rolled along beside her, copying every move. When Mrs. Wick checked on her, she found Ariana asleep on her side and smiled indulgently as she pulled the covers up. The child's occasional mischief only made her more endearing. Under the Wick family Christmas tree, one present remained unopened. Watson picked it up, read the name on it, and froze. "Albus Dumbledore?" he murmured. The name tugged at something in him. He carried the gift to Ariana's room and placed it beside her bed. The Wick family never intended for Ariana to entirely abandon her past. Even though John had implied her brother was not especially capable, their message to her was simple: cherish your family. Watson bent, whispered into Ariana's ear, "I hope you'll be my daughter, and I hope you'll always be happy." He nudged the little bear so it wouldn't fall off the bed, then tiptoed out and closed the door. When the room was quiet again, Ariana opened one eye, glanced at the parcel by her pillow, then closed her eyes and clutched the brooch to her chest. Chapter 606, End of Holiday, Social Star Spirit, Grindelwald Dead. The headline ran across the center of the Daily Prophet. A name had reappeared in the public eye with a force that made everyone look. Inger Griffiths? John stared at the paper. He had said before that removing Grindelwald would be a permanent solution. He hadn't expected anyone to actually do it. "Grindelwald is dead?" he asked himself, doubtful. The once feared Dark Lord of Europe. Could he have been killed so easily in a small country by a minister of magic? He picked up a letter Riddle had sent, noting the signature, Old Barty. Like John, Barty was skeptical. The letter said Rippy had verified it wasn't Polyjuice Potion. John trusted Rippy. Anyone who could operate under Grindelwald's nose and survive had to be exceptional. But if it wasn't Polyjuice, what else could explain a convincing impersonation? Grindelwald didn't die easily. The whole thing smelled suspicious. John decided to have the Star Disciples investigate. He walked into the Constellation Society and into a plane where 2 Star Spirit Guards, Hector and Hermes, were practicing, their blows kicking up gusts of wind that swept across the grounds. A cluster of star spirits cheered them on from the sidelines. Nearby, Silverhand Johnny shimmered with a silver-white light. John snapped his fingers, and the 2 fighters halted, reverting back to their smaller star spirit forms and scurrying over to him. After John's guidance and training, the star spirits could switch into full star spirit guard mode. Dozens of them transformed at once, and a formidable contingent of star spirit guards stood ready, his most reliable protection. "You're here," Silverhand Johnny said, dissolving into light and merging with John's essence. "Now you really look like an army." John surveyed the neat ranks with a small smile. He selected 2 of the Star Spirit Guards and sent them off to strengthen the France and America branches, an extra layer of security. The chosen guards reverted to their smaller forms and hopped off gleefully. To them, being sent out to protect other places was an honor. In the American branch, Nagini crouched to greet the tiny newly arrived Star Spirit. "Hello," she said, smiling. "Bubabu," the Star Spirit replied in its own chittering language. John chuckled. "It's saying hello." "You understand it?" Nagini asked. "Of course," John said. "They're my creations." "You always have a way," Nagini said, beaming. "Where's Credence?" "He's outside," John answered. "And thank you." "We don't need these," Nagini said modestly. John waved a hand. "Just keep a careful watch over this place for me." "I will, my king," she promised. At the France branch, it was lively in an altogether different way. "They're celebrating Grindelwald's death," Jin reported. "I heard Grindelwald blew up part of Père Lachaise in Paris before, destroyed family tombs and all." John heard it and stayed calm. That was excessive. He had no intention of reminding them who had once turned time into an explosion at La Père Lachaise. The holiday passed, with John dividing his time between training the spirits and continuing his research. Students began to return the day before term resumed. Daphne arrived back and immediately started hunting for that ferret of a boy, Malfoy. The star spirit Daphne had been training behaved perfectly. It had already learned to transform into a star spirit guard. John felt a quiet satisfaction as his creations stood ready to go wherever he might need them. Chapter 591, Astoria had brought her star spirit guards, and for some reason Neville's looked even more robust than usual. Malfoy arrived last, knowing he probably couldn't dodge Daphne's wrath later, so he sauntered in at the very end. The star spirit he'd trained swaggered ahead of him, chattering incessantly. Dozens of the other star spirit guards gave chase to that single noisy little creature. "Like owner, like pet," John muttered to himself. The talkative star spirit never stopped jabbering. Even Hector, the steady star spirit John had chosen, trotted over to join the pursuit. Eventually, the little chatterbox, unable to outrun its pursuers, transformed into a star spirit guard to intimidate them, only to have every last one of them transform as well. What had been a herd of glowing golden sprites became a pack of fierce star spirit guards. In the end, the bully was beaten back into its small, harmless form. John stepped in to stop the beating. After one rough outing, the little creature had become socialized. "From now on, you'll be called Little Dragon," John said, setting the trembling star spirit down on the table so the others couldn't continue the assault. Malfoy didn't escape Daphne's wrath. She'd grabbed him and hung him upside down, glaring at him the whole time. "I was alone in Chelsea," she hissed. Astoria felt terrible. She'd been the one to ditch her sister. But Malfoy suffered the most. He would sooner die than beg. He refused to plead once, apparently not because of a tongue-tying curse. Later, John removed the enchantment. Malfoy collapsed against John's robes and cried bitterly. "John, please save me," he pleaded. "Sorry, I can't," John said, firm. "No, you can," Malfoy insisted. "I can?" John asked, surprised. "All you need to do is stop provoking Daphne." Malfoy hesitated. He wanted to ask more. Maybe to ask John to do something about Slytherin, but John was already thinking about the blood curse treatment plan and had no time for distractions. The next day, John was in Slughorn's headmaster office. Slughorn peered at the papers on his desk and exclaimed, "John, this is a miracle. You will be the most outstanding potion master in history." "This plan could potentially treat more blood curses," John said. "These all have limitations," Slughorn warned, but his eyes were bright. "No one else could pull this off, but you." "That may be," John agreed, though he wasn't being picky, he was being realistic. The restorative fluid John had brewed was stronger than the one Daphne had used before and could keep the treatment rate ahead of the injury rate. "I hear Barty Crouch is pushing a werewolf equality bill," Slughorn said, lowering his voice. "If you can publish this, John, it will be worth a first-class Merlin medal." Old Barty bringing up equality again made John narrow his eyes. Publishing the research might be doable. The work was aimed at blood curses, not the werewolf curse, but it would lend credibility to Barty's efforts. Still, before anything else, Astoria needed treatment. Her condition was different from Daphne's and far more precarious. She could have a life-threatening episode at any moment. John gathered what he needed and moved everything to the Constellation Society. He found Daphne and said, "You're starting the treatment?" Daphne's face was worried. "Astoria will be okay, right?" "She'll be fine," John promised. "I promise. I believe you." Daphne watched her sister laughing and talking with Malfoy, and for once she didn't have the heart to argue with him. Constellation Society Holiday, Harvest. The holidays had arrived, but the season didn't feel over until everyone in the Great Hall had exhausted their stories. Students compared where they'd gone and what they'd done. Only when every anecdote had been shared did the mood settle. Malfoy picked at a newly made potato cake and asked, puzzled, "Did the kitchen change the menu?" "I think so," Blaise replied, munching on one and praising the different preparation. "My family and I spent Christmas in Norway. The wizards there were very friendly," Goyle offered cheerfully, prompting a run of competitive holiday tales from the Slytherins. The Constellation Society table was quieter. Malfoy's silence stemmed from his holiday disaster, though not everyone caught on. Crabbe was clueless. Looking at the subdued Draco, he asked, "Draco, did you go to France? What was interesting there?" Malfoy and Astoria fell silent at the same time. John glanced between them. Romantic Paris had become a disaster. Malfoy let out a long, resentful sigh. "I was robbed." Crabbe blinked. "What?" "I said I was robbed of my money, you idiot," Malfoy snapped. No romantic escapades. The couple arrived in Paris only to be mugged. Someone posing as a helpful stranger offered directions to their hotel. Trusting and unfamiliar with the city, Malfoy followed. They ended up cornered, and a broomstick snatched Astoria's bag. Malfoy gave chase, using his star spirit to knock the thief down and beat him, but the galleons were gone. The pair nearly wound up penniless in Paris. "How did you get back?" Crabbe asked in astonishment. Malfoy tracked down his only contact in France, Heinrich. Heinrich didn't make a fuss, but John almost choked on his laughter hearing the story. Had he been stronger, Malfoy vowed he would have thumped John for it. In the end, they returned from an unforgettable, if not terribly romantic, holiday. John had thought Daphne would be delighted by Malfoy's misery, but she was expressionless, as if it no longer affected her. "What about you?" Pansy asked, the second clueless one. Daphne set down her fork and said flatly, "I went to a Muggle restaurant in Chelsea to learn cooking." Pansy's face drained of color. Daphne, with her experimental palate, and a Muggle chef? Panic rose in Pansy, who grabbed Theodore. "I just remembered something. Theodore, let's go." Theodore nodded, and Pansy tried to stand, but Daphne put a hand over Pansy's right hand and held it down with a force that sent cold sweat dripping from Pansy's brow. "The chef there is very famous. His food is excellent," Daphne said like a recitation. "Chef Ramsay was happy I wanted to learn from him, at first, anyway." What followed was worse than Malfoy's story. Ramsay had at first thought he'd found a young woman with real passion for cooking and had given Daphne special attention. Then came the tasting. "What is this? Get that filthy mess away from me," Ramsay had cried. "I've realized you're a natural because you can absolutely call garbage cuisine," he ranted. "Do you have taste buds? An old woman in Mexico could make something better with her toes than this. Take it away. Don't put that in front of me. Oh God, why don't you just kill me? If I have to eat this, I'd rather cut off my tongue. Please, take me away. I'll give you this restaurant." At first, Ramsay's impression of Daphne, a beautiful girl passionate about cooking with solid basic knife skills. Later, a beautiful girl who seemed to take pleasure in torturing the kitchen. He begged forgiveness. "What you need is to forget everything you've ever learned," he said, finally subdued, as if this were some cosmic test of a brave soul. "Your cooking doesn't belong here. It doesn't belong in this world." "But this is traditional Eastern cuisine," Daphne protested. "No traditional cuisine mixes pearls with chocolate." Ramsay roared, then took a breath. "Miss Greengrass, please, try to see it from a normal person's perspective." He presented a perfectly roasted Jamaican jerk chicken and said calmly, "This is called food." Then he gestured to Daphne's creation. This is called, sorry, my language might be strong, this is called fucking kitchen waste. The tirade had been educational in a brutal way. Daphne's trip to Chelsea had at least taught her something. Pansy's hand was still trapped under Daphne's, going purple from lack of circulation, while cold sweat tracked down her temple. Chapter 592. Pansy wanted to run, but Daphne's grip was too strong for someone so slight to break free. After hearing that miserable story, John fell silent. Malfoy sneered with satisfaction. So you finally realized what you're making is garbage. Pansy cried out. Her hand felt like it was about to snap. But people don't laugh and cry the same way, and Malfoy was still in full mockery mode. If you ask me, you shouldn't be learning to cook. That's not for you. You could be a curse breaker. Your dishes are more terrifying than curses. Ha ha ha. After that day, Malfoy's memory was foggy. He only remembered that he'd come closer to death than ever before. In a haze, he saw his ancestor, Amanda Malfoy, who had come to Britain with William the Conqueror. According to Slytherin records, Daphne had used at least 10 nasty jinxes, everything from the jelly legs jinx to the hair-raising charm and the toenail-growing hex. When Madame Pomfrey first saw Malfoy, she apparently thought a new species of magical creature had been delivered to the wrong ward. Malfoy slept for a day and a night in the hospital wing and woke with intermittent spasms and convulsions. No one at Hogwarts felt any sympathy, except maybe Astoria. Malfoy's talent for attracting disaster had taken a qualitative leap. Even though Daphne had unleashed a series of attacks in anger, she'd held herself back. None of the curses she used did lasting bodily harm. After that ill-fated trip to Chelsea, Daphne's visits to the kitchen dropped off sharply. Neville, what's wrong with you, Neville? Hannah's scream cut through the Great Hall, and John saw Neville being carried out by several students. He feared poisoning at first. Hannah, in tears, managed between sobs, I tried one of the recipes. John stepped closer and looked at the discarded lunchbox. Of all things, it was that old monstrosity, the chocolate rice noodle roll. Not everyone could stomach those. John shook his head. Neville was still too young to be blamed. Constellation Society. John was preparing the remaining supplies for the treatment. He might have to face the third or fourth surge of the curse. Its second burst was proving unpredictable. He had the soul potion ready and ample restorative fluid. He planned to attempt the treatment on the first Sunday after the holidays. Before that, he closed 2 books. Lately, he'd been reading 2 heavy tomes at once. Both were dense, especially the Ravenclaw volume. While it lacked the malice of the Dark Book, it was an ocean of knowledge, the crystallization of Ravenclaw thinking. It ranged from charms to celestial mechanics to time and prophecy, far broader and more complex than the Dark Book's narrower focus on time, curses, and souls. Leaving the plane room, John felt the need to rest. Extended mental strain had taken its toll. On the first-floor corridor, as he stepped out of the Constellation Society, a figure passed by and he blinked in surprise. Harry? Seeing who it was made John a little startled. Harry seemed to be leaving the castle. Chapter 608, Harry's Teacher, Private Tutoring. Harry had never expected personal instruction from Dumbledore. Dumbledore had nurtured him over the years, but rarely intervened directly in charms or techniques. In fact, Harry had learned more practical magic from Snape than from Dumbledore, so the summons made him quietly thrilled. Dumbledore's approval felt more rewarding than 12 OWLs. He checked the note again. Meet at Hagrid's at 8:30 p.m. What could require meeting at Hagrid's? Trusting Dumbledore, Harry put on his invisibility cloak and slipped out before 8:30. The cloak, which had once easily covered him and friends, now barely wrapped his older self. 7th-year Harry had grown a lot. At Hagrid's hut, he heard voices. Have a little more tea, Dumbledore. No, Hagrid, this armor looks very fine. The door opened. Dumbledore stood in the doorway. I should be going. All right, Dumbledore, we haven't seen one another much lately. Hagrid accompanied him out. Inside, golden flames burned in the fireplace and the kettle glowed red. Hagrid hurried to lower the flames with his tongs. Dumbledore closed the door and said to the clearing air, We must change locations, Harry. Harry slipped off his cloak. Where are we going? The Forbidden Forest. Dumbledore nodded toward the trees. There's a good place in there where you can learn some things. They set off. Harry hurried to keep up, puzzled. But why not the castle? We could use a classroom. No, Harry, classrooms are too cramped. Dumbledore kept walking. We need to hurry so you'll have more time. Time? Harry wondered what urgency Dumbledore meant. The Forbidden Forest was dark. Harry lit his wand. Dumbledore chatted as they walked. I imagine you read the newspapers in your spare time. Yes, sir, Harry replied. Many major events have happened recently. Dumbledore's voice shifted, carrying a hint of something beneath the surface. Harry nodded. Grindelwald, he's dead. It still felt unbelievable that so much had happened that year. Voldemort's fall at Hogwarts, Grindelwald's reported death in Poland. Hearing the name stirred something in Dumbledore. Yes, he's dead. Then Dumbledore changed course. Do you believe he's truly dead? Harry was taken aback. He hadn't paid much attention to Grindelwald. His reach in Britain had always been limited. But Dumbledore's question was deliberate. Harry hesitated. All the newspapers are saying, sometimes what's printed in newspapers is not the truth. Dumbledore's lips were tight. The Grindelwald I knew wouldn't be the sort to die quietly in custody. You mean Grindelwald might still be alive? Harry's eyes widened. Dumbledore didn't answer directly. Instead, he pointed ahead. We're almost there. They followed an animal path until an open glade opened around them. In the middle, a faint, dreamlike radiance hovered over the grass. Where is this? Harry asked. Dumbledore smiled. I discovered it when I was still a student. I call it the Glowgrass Meadow. When they stepped onto the grass, tiny motes of light rose and twined between them. Harry stood, speechless. I've never seen anything like this. Many kinds of knowledge must be found outside books, Harry. Dumbledore led him to an oval stone and sat. All our work is about exploring the unknown. A wizard's magic comes from here. He tapped Harry's chest gently. The stronger the heart, the stronger the magic. This is love. You'll spend this term here. I can't teach you everything. The most dangerous spells change with the user's strength. Dumbledore's voice was patient. You must learn to master your own power. Can I tell Ron and Hermione? Harry didn't want to hide it from his closest friends. You may, Dumbledore said kindly. Harry had one more question that had been on his mind. Dumbledore, why me? This was the second time Harry had asked it. The first time, Dumbledore had answered because of love. This time, the answer was the same. Harry, you have something different, Dumbledore said, looking at him with depth. You have love. But I'm not the savior, Harry said. John killed Lord Voldemort. Precisely because he has too much. Because of who he is, he doesn't need help from others, Dumbledore replied. You are different, Harry. Harry's shoulders slumped at the implication. You need a purpose. John would be a good choice. Chapter 593. Don't say that. I'll never catch up to him. Harry sounded discouraged, drained of the fighting spirit he usually carried. He knew his own limits. Dumbledore regarded him earnestly. That's exactly why I came, he said. John will keep growing, and he will make mistakes. Someone always has to clean up after him when he does, Harry muttered. Dumbledore was frank about why he had sought Harry out. As Dumbledore's heir, Harry would have to shoulder responsibilities that once belonged to Dumbledore to help bring peace to the magical world. You won't be alone, Dumbledore added. Others will teach you as well. Others? Who else? Harry asked, curious. Dumbledore smiled mysteriously. You'll see. Their first lesson that day was Transfiguration. Dumbledore didn't spend the class on rote spell work. Instead, he shared his experience and insight. Harry's transfiguration wasn't exceptional. Hermione was likely better, but Harry had an almost instinctual talent for defense against the dark arts. Even under the guidance of the eccentric defense professors, he excelled. Transfiguration, however, remained an indispensable discipline. A mark of a truly great wizard was often found in how well they could transfigure. Before he became headmaster, Dumbledore had taught both transfiguration and defense at Hogwarts. He could handle either subject with ease. Near the end of class, Harry raised the question that had been nagging him. I have to ask, how can John turn into a dragon? That's an extremely unlikely thing, Dumbledore replied. Among animagi, most people turn into ordinary animals, much like Patronuses. He flicked his wand. Silver motes scattered and coalesced into a shimmering silver phoenix in front of Harry. Most Patronuses are animals, only a few become something else. The silver phoenix lifted, its song sending a swirl of glowing specks into the air that circled behind it. Harry was speechless. It was the first time he had seen Dumbledore's Patronus. Unlike Harry's own, it was glorious and powerful. The silver phoenix returned to Dumbledore and shimmered away. "Our lesson for today will end here," Dumbledore said. Harry still wanted to press the matter, but he glanced at the time and realized he should leave. If he didn't, he'd be on the receiving end of Snape's murderous look and potions the next day. He parted with Dumbledore and headed out through the castle. "Do you really think he can?" Snape appeared as Harry left. Dumbledore shook his head. "John has created new kinds of magic. He's harder to read." He'd heard of John's star spirit guards from Hagrid. Dumbledore turned to Snape. "I hope you'll take over Harry's occlumency lessons, Severus." Snape hesitated. "I will consider it." He turned and left. Chapter 609, Treatment, 3-Stage Curse Outbreak. Everything was prepared. Now they were only waiting for Sunday. Astoria had spent the last few days with her sister Daphne. Daphne had told her everything about the treatment, and Astoria had grown understandably anxious. Draco wondered why Astoria had avoided him for days. "Do you think she dislikes me?" he asked, pouting. John patted Draco's shoulder in consolation. "Don't worry. She just doesn't want to see you right now." "Isn't that just being disliked?" Draco sank into gloom. He had expected some comforting words, but John's bluntness made it worse. John realized his remark sounded ambiguous and hurried to explain. "That's not what I meant. She just needs some space." "No need to explain further. I get it," Draco said dramatically. "So please don't say another word, my king." It was the first time John had ever comforted someone like that. Draco left forlorn. John stroked his chin. "He seems even more miserable." Neville, who had witnessed the exchange, quietly moved away from John. Astoria was frightened. Daphne had told her about the blood curse and its severity. "I'll be okay, won't I?" Astoria asked, trembling. Daphne hugged her, kissed her forehead, and smiled. "That's John. You'll be fine, I promise." Daphne's reassurance calmed Astoria a little. When Daphne suggested telling Draco, Astoria refused. "I don't want Draco to worry. He'd lose sleep if he knew." This year's Quidditch season was crucial, and as Draco's girlfriend, Astoria didn't want to jeopardize his performance. Daphne stroked Astoria's hair with a touch of jealousy. "I really don't know why Draco won your heart." "It's strange," Astoria laughed softly. "I don't know either. Maybe that's what love is." Daphne felt a pang of exclusion. Astoria, realizing she'd said the wrong thing, hurried to add, "John is different. He's very special." "He's gentle," Daphne admitted, face flushing, "and captivating." Daphne had first met John after a prank by Peeves. Years later, she still remembered the figure who'd put Peeves in his place. From that time on, she'd found herself noticing the Muggle-born boy who seemed out of place in Slytherin. Astoria watched her sister and smiled knowingly, but her heart ached. Daphne was about to take on something terrible. Astoria was sensitive to the feelings of others. John, however, seemed indifferent about romantic pursuits. He was more obsessed with magic and power than with love. If Daphne had any hope of winning his heart, it would likely take a long time for John to notice. Saturday's training ended, and Sunday evening came. Astoria swallowed her nerves, took Daphne's hand, and the two sisters stepped into the Constellation Society. The Star Spirit Guards fell into two tidy lines to welcome them. Those who had spent the holidays with Astoria bobbed and waved excitedly. The Star Spirit Guards were small golden figures, each with their own quirks. Astoria's had vertical, hair-like filaments and looked like a well-behaved little girl. She recognized it instantly. The guard hopped onto her shoulder. "It's you," she murmured, smiling and touching it. The little guard grabbed her finger and nuzzled it. Daphne found her own guard trying hard to get attention. The guards seemed to develop different traits the longer they stayed with someone. John emerged from a doorway and picked up a little dragon-shaped Star Spirit Guard from a table. "The longer they're with someone, the more abilities they pick up," he said. The moment the little dragon appeared, the welcoming guards bounced up and down. The dragon crossed its tiny arms and looked ridiculously arrogant. Daphne recognized the haughty look at once. John only shrugged. "It's rather unpopular with the others at the moment." To the others, the dragon snorted disdainfully. "You unnamed trash, hear me? Creator Sama named me personally." John cut it off before it worsened. Bowing slightly, he smiled at the two sisters. Everything's ready. Let's go in. Please, ladies. Of course. Daphne returned the smile and stepped through. Astoria hesitated. Her little star spirit guard seemed reluctant to let her go. You can bring it in, John said, seeing her doubt. It might help. Astoria nodded and went through the door with her guard. They were not in Dragon Valley this time. The space opened onto a deserted island, circled by water, starlight scattered across the sky. On the island, a cauldron and the prepared potion waited. John handed the vial to Astoria, his expression serious. I will make sure you live, he promised. Thank you, John, she replied, trusting him completely. No one in the Constellation Society knew John better. She believed the king would keep his word. Astoria drank the potion. Nothing immediate happened, much like Daphne's experience. Next, you need to touch this book, John said, and a dark book floated toward her. He drew his wand, every precaution taken. As soon as Astoria placed her hand on the book, she lost consciousness. Chapter 594. John moved at once. Astoria's body floated in the air as the blood curse erupted. A ripple spread from her, and the once calm water surface turned turbulent. John's right hand shimmered silver. He waved his wand, and a pale, silver-white soul form drifted out. Thousands of soul scalpels streaked toward Astoria. Now that John had reached level 7 in magic, he handled this with greater skill. His power suppressed the curse inside Astoria, keeping it from escaping. With another flick of his wand, he sent a second potion into her ears and nostrils to protect her brain. In John's mind, the curse inside Astoria was clear, far worse than Daphne's. Daphne's curse had been in incubation and might not erupt. Astoria's was a bomb set to detonate when she reached maturity. The soul scalpel slashed along the soul, excising the curse while inflicting damage to her body. John cast Water Prison, letting the repair fluid envelop Astoria and mend the wounds. This procedure was no easier than the one on Daphne. His expression was grave. This is more serious than I expected. He increased the number of soul scalpels. 3,000 blades threaded through Astoria's soul. Each strike whittled away the curse, while the repair fluid patched the body as it was cut. When one thread of the curse waned, another swelled. John kept pressing. He knew the second phase would come. As he anticipated, the curse, at its weakest point, erupted again like a compressed wad of cotton released from the hand, rapidly spreading across Astoria's body. John raised the stakes, accelerating the soul scalpels until they blurred into a chaotic silver dance. Daphne watched them as though they were dragons weaving through Astoria, cutting, stitching, healing, a continuous cycle, until only a small core remained lodged in her abdomen. Astoria's consciousness had not yet returned. Daphne held her breath while John concentrated the scalpels, preparing to crush the heart of the curse in one blow. Suddenly, a black shadow covered Astoria's soul, moving faster than the scalpels. Her body began to falter. John inhaled sharply. This eruption was fiercer than before. He still had a trump card. A silver flash lit his eyes, and the world around him slowed. Divine speed, the benefit of Jowu's blood, was not just swifter movement, but heightened reaction. Everything stretched into slow motion as John used insight. His pupils widened, and the scalpels became a curtain of light. Astoria, who should have collapsed, began to heal. The black blot lasted less than 3 seconds before the scalpels drove it into a single focal point in her abdomen. A silver streak passed through John, and seizing the moment, he plunged his hand into the curse and extracted it whole. The water globe shattered, and Astoria slumped into Daphne's arms. The operation was complete. When John's pupils returned to normal, he saw the star spirit scurrying below, finally pinned under Astoria. John muttered inwardly, "Did you forget you can transform?" The little creature struggled to poke its head out. Daphne rushed over and cradled her sister. "How is she?" Daphne asked, voice tight. John placed a hand on Astoria's forehead and felt the residual warmth. "The curse has been removed," he said. "She'll need time to recover." "That's wonderful." Daphne exhaled, clutching Astoria. "It's okay now." The star spirit bounced happily, and John gave a faint smile as he left the isolated island and returned to the Constellation Society. Billabuli, a group of star spirits chased after the little dragon. The dragon kept looking back defiantly, muttering under its breath about how it had been taught badly. John sighed. "I really shouldn't have let Draco train it." Hector brought a pen, Hermes fetched parchment and climbed onto the table. John took the pen and began to record the treatment process. Treating Astoria had taught him more about the blood curse. It behaved less like a simple hex and more like a parasitic entity that replicated and embedded itself in the fetus. A person with the blood curse was essentially shackled. Once the curse was removed, the shackles opened and the body could temporarily absorb and channel more magic power. Back in the headmaster's office, Slughorn stared at the parchment filled with John's thesis. "No one has thought of this before, John. You're a genius," he said, stunned. John shrugged. "That's a bit much." Slughorn was ecstatic that the blood curse could be dealt with. Because curses carry stigma, families often abandon children born with the blood curse in hopes of stopping it from continuing. John's discovery, however, reframed the curse. It had been a limiter. Once removed, the body, used to absorbing extra magic because of the curse, didn't revert. It could actually increase its magical capacity. That meant more than just lifting a curse. It could save many lives. "As a potion master, I offer you my highest respect," Slughorn said, standing and bowing in a show of reverence. After the bow, he rubbed his hands awkwardly. John guessed his next thought and smiled. "This is the result of both of us," John said. Slughorn, smiling with pride, confessed, "I regret retiring back then. I should have stayed and been your teacher." "I have a great teacher," John replied. "He taught me a lot." "Nicholas Flamel?" Slughorn waved his hands, almost apologetic. "Sorry, John, I didn't mean any disrespect to the greatest alchemist." "The greatest alchemist? I like that title," John said lightly. John smoothed his robes and stood. "I think this matter is closed." "Of course, we'll publish this as soon as possible," Slughorn said enthusiastically. "I haven't even gotten a first-class medal yet." Slughorn's fervor reminded John of Damo Alex, a teacher and pupil with identical zeal. Leaving the headmaster's office, John went to the hospital wing to see Astoria. Though the curse had been removed, she would be weak for a while. Daphne, too, would need some rest, but Astoria required at least a week under care. Draco had finally learned what had happened. He sat beside Astoria's bed, head bowed, full of regret. "I should have noticed, Atto," Draco murmured hoarsely. "I was too slow." Astoria's face was pale, but she smiled. "I didn't want you to worry, Draco." He squeezed her hand. "You'll be all right." Even Daphne, who usually disliked Draco, didn't interrupt him. Seeing his rare tenderness, she understood why her sister loved him. Still, Draco spoke with such intensity that Daphne found it overly dramatic. "She's just hospitalized," John said as he entered, exasperated at Draco's display. "Also, a reminder, Astoria's misfortune has become a blessing. Her magic will increase. You'll probably remain at the very bottom." Draco, suddenly animated at the threat to his ranking, leapt up. "John, do you have any curses or something?" "I know Avada Kedavra. Want me to show you?" John replied flatly. Draco swallowed what he'd been about to say and stewed over it. If Astoria's power rose, would he be doomed to lag behind forever? Determined, he resolved to work harder. The next morning, he went out for exercise, met Neville, and after being outrun by 2 laps, returned home feeling utterly deflated. Chapter 595, Slughorn moved with remarkable efficiency. It also indirectly displayed the formidable connections of the current Hogwarts headmaster. Half of the Wizengamot Review Committee were his former students or old friends. A week after the paper went public, excerpts appeared in various academic journals, some even calling it the century's last miracle. The blood curse ran through ancient families. Lineages that had existed for millennia inevitably ran up against old enemies or terrifying magical beasts, and the curse followed. Some infants born with it were irrevocably abandoned. Most died. There were exceptions, of course. John Wick's name reverberated through the headlines again. Slughorn's name was on the paper too, but anyone with eyes could see the principal had once more taken credit without lifting a finger. Damo Alex couldn't help but feel envious. "I should have applied for that job back then," he muttered. He regretted it bitterly. Although his qualifications made him an unlikely candidate for headmaster, it wasn't impossible if he had pushed harder. Now he had to watch John receive another Merlin medal, while his old teacher coasted to recognition. Pride was a trap Slytherins found hard to escape. Other potion masters felt the same, jealous of Slughorn's effortless victory. Slughorn's portrait had already been hung at Hogwarts after the last battle. Now the blood curse had put him on a chocolate frog card. After the paper was published, John received letters, most of them about the blood curse. Some pure-blood families questioned the authenticity of the curse's supposed limiter. If it were real, they argued, the blood curse could be harnessed to enhance a wizard's abilities. John glanced at the letters and burned them with a contemptuous flick of a wand. Enhancement? You wish. Without John's soul surgery, those curses would kill anyone who crossed them. Yes, in theory they could augment power, but only if John intervened. There was also a potion that could suppress the curse. If the blood curse were weak enough, the potion could cure it. It was called the Ruby Potion, a counterpart to the Emerald Potion, both of them John's own creations. By the end of January, the paper had continued fermenting in public discourse. Eventually, a potion master dug into it for a day and a night and spotted something everyone had overlooked. If the blood curse can be lifted, he asked, does that mean werewolves, who are also cursed, can be cured? Once the question went out, it escaped the professionals and swallowed the entire community. Headline after headline exploded across the papers. Werewolf savior, sensation in all circles. The long-standing debate flared back to life. Are werewolves human or merely humanoid? The distinction was enormous. If human, they were kun. If humanoid, they were considered magical creatures with human intelligence. Many pure-blood houses had long argued that killing a magical creature should carry lighter punishment, and the old prejudice pushed the public toward the latter view. Werewolves did have the wolfsbane potion now, which helped them control their bloodlust during the full moon, but their contagiousness kept most people wary. Now, however, hope glimmered. Perhaps a cure existed. Newsstands filled with headlines, Werewolf Bill raised again, Are werewolves human or wolf? Savior or tyrant? The Third Dark Lord? John Wick's true purpose? And the inevitable tabloid scream, John Wick's romantic escapades at Hogwarts. John had handed that last one to Tang Mi to handle. Backed by Slughorn's name, the paper shot around the globe like wildfire. Potion masters publicly declared that, based on the research, if the curse could indeed be nullified, werewolves might be restored to human form. Detractors existed, but they were few. The involvement of authoritative experts had lent the paper enormous credibility. Is it really possible? Students asked in the corridors. It wasn't just curious teens. The whole wizarding world buzzed. Go read the paper, you fool, Draco Malfoy snapped at a Hufflepuff who had dared ask John directly. If John had to answer every question, he'd be exhausted. The Hufflepuff left red-faced. John clapped Malfoy on the shoulder. I've never felt you were as reassuring as you are now, Draco, he said. Malfoy straightened, hands on hips, and then inwardly fretted over the implication of never felt. Still, John felt relieved. If every student asked him for an explanation, he'd never have time for anything else. And even if a cure were possible, John couldn't personally treat every werewolf. What he needed to do was push for werewolf equalization. Give werewolves equal rights, John told himself, and they would take jobs, integrate into wizarding society, and gradually become part of the community again. The old antagonism had produced radicals like Fenrir Greyback. A friendlier world would reduce the itch to resist. That outcome would protect the community while also serving John's and Old Barty's interests. Convincing proud wizards to grant equal rights to a group that turned into wolves at the full moon, however, would be tough. Difficulty is not the enemy, John mused. What's dangerous is despair. Now was an opportune moment. 3 major events were shaping the magical world: Grindelwald's death, the upcoming election for president of the International Confederation of Wizards, and the reshuffling of the Sacred 28. The political gains from the first event had largely flowed to the Polish Minister for Magic, Inger Griffiths, who'd been lionized as a national hero. That boost made her a powerful contender in the Confederation election. She had become the candidate everyone rallied behind. To many, she had been transformed from a long shot into a people's champion overnight. That made her Old Barty's chief rival. John hadn't met Inger, but her new status as hero posed a threat. The political capital from Grindelwald's death would soon be spent. Old Barty needed fresh leverage. John set his sights on the Sacred 28, the oldest pure-blood families in Europe. bound by intermarriage and tacit agreements. As a Crouch, Old Barty was already part of that circle. If John could manipulate the Sacred 28's re-election and push through a werewolf equalization bill, Old Barty would have accomplished something world-shaking. Opponents would come from other ministry factions, families hostile to werewolves, and those competing for influence. John planned to use the Sacred 28 vote to stack the chips his way. "When your chips are bigger than everyone else's, you become the dealer," he said, rubbing his silver ring. A small smile tugged at his lips. Chapter 596. When it came to power, he was the biggest one. 4 of the Sacred 28 were enough to sway the entire alliance. The Silver Hand Alliance ranked no lower than the Sacred 28. "Those who don't obey, get out. If you want to come in, you must show sincerity," the message went. John watched the black and white owls fly out of Hogwarts. Somewhere in Nocturne Alley, Barty stooped to pick up a discarded copy of the Daily Prophet and stared at the headline about the election. He paused, then looked up. Old Barty stood in the garden, carrying a small gift box. His gaze dropped to the paper in Barty's hands, and the next second, the newspaper was tossed into a nearby trash bin. Barty walked away as if he hadn't seen him. "Son," Old Barty hurried after him. "Lemon sherbet, remember? It was your favorite when you were little." He hurried to Barty's side. "Every time we passed the ice cream shop, you'd beg your mother to buy it for you." Barty stopped. He looked at his father, temples streaked with gray, the same face he bore. He said flatly, "Is this election of yours supposed to show people that you're a loving father?" No, no, no," Old Barty croaked, murmuring. "I just want to be a father." "Crouch, who chases power," Barty said coldly, "will never be stopped by family ties." "You want a heroic son," Barty continued, "but I never was. You should know, this is all fake." The truth was simple and bitter. Old Barty's son hadn't been some undercover hero against Voldemort. He had been a true Death Eater, a disgrace in Crouch's eyes, sent to Azkaban. "War hero?" Barty scoffed. "A light cast by power, Minister Crouch." To him, he was only a tool, a way for Old Barty to wash away past stains and groom a winning image for future elections. A hero's father courted votes. A criminal's father did not. Old Barty opened and closed his mouth, finally swallowing whatever he had wanted to say. Barty turned back toward the wooden house, glanced once at the Minister of Magic standing outside the door, and closed it. The most successful Minister of Magic in nearly a century was nothing more than a terrible father. Old Barty lingered at the door, carefully set the lemon sherbet down, and left without meeting his son's eyes. He did not look like a distinguished minister at all. Barty stood behind the closed door, listening until he knew his father was gone. He turned to the mirror in his room and studied his reflection. Despite his repeated denials, he looked very much like Old Barty. The same features, the same hard lines, the same stubble, making him appear haggard. Anger swelled. He clenched his fist and struck the mirror. It shattered. The shards cut his knuckles, and blood dripped to the floor. "I hate you, Father," he hissed. Chapter 6 and 12, Fermentation. The potential of the Star Spirit Guards. The debate sparked by the paper showed no sign of dying down. If anything, it was fermenting and pulling more people in. At first, there had been only a few voices defending werewolves, but over time their numbers grew. The werewolf community no longer refused wizards' entry, and many who had seen them up close spoke about their kindness. Their ferocity, people argued, was not innate, but the product of a curse. Witnesses were interviewed, a woman who had once been saved by a werewolf, others who described the warmth of life inside the werewolf community, calling it far friendlier than other wizarding gatherings. Bit by bit, these stories began to erode the public perception of werewolves. "Werewolves have killed far fewer people than wizards," a former Auror remarked, and the statement resonated with many. Why hate werewolves? For their appearance, or for what they became under a curse? These werewolves were victims too. No one chose to be this way. In the clear moments between transformations, they were kind, friendly people who worked harder than most for a fraction of the pay. They struggled to survive and still faced the world's malice. Many were moved to tears by their plight. Even pure-blood families began to voice sympathy, acknowledging that the origins of the condition lay beyond the victim's control. It was easy to imagine that before the wolfsbane potion, werewolves had been hunted like wild beasts. February came. The Star Spirit Guards had not stopped training. John had divided them into groups and placed each in a different environment. As the environments changed, so did the Star Spirit Guards' developmental paths. Those raised in the rugged, rocky regions developed powerful climbing abilities and became physically stronger. The Star Spirits trained in the ocean acquired control over water flow. They could withstand pressure, move freely underwater, and maneuver with speed. In the forest, the Star Spirits gained rapid healing and absorbed starlight to become more agile at night. Most remarkable were the Star Spirits bred in Dragon Valley. They displayed the strongest inherent Star Spirit qualities of all and were significantly more adept at applying magic. Being with powerful beings makes them stronger, John mused as he watched Hector transform. Twin horns sprouted on Hector's head, condensing a sphere of light that became a laser and punched clean through a stone wall. Hermes darted along the cliff face, his hands morphing into wings that flashed with a cold light. Hector leaned toward the robustness of a warrior. His raw attack power outmatched the others. Hermes was nimble and versatile, more like a ranger with unique transformation skills. They clashed. Hector planted himself on the ground and unleashed a barrage of hornfire. Hermes dodged through the air, sending down light orbs that raised a cloud of dust. From that dust, Hector launched himself, smashing into the mountain like a cannonball, climbing with both hands and feet, and tearing loose a boulder to hurl at Hermes. Hermes couldn't dodge in time. His blade-like wings sliced through the rock, but Hector rode it through the air and slammed Hermes into the ground. The impact raised a roar and a chaotic wind pressure. Hermes lay pinned as a shield charm barely held off Hector's fist. John waved his hand and separated the two Star Spirit Guards. They reverted to their Star Spirit forms. Hermes, mischievous even then, stuck out a foot and tripped Hector, prompting the bigger spirit to chase him in anger. "These two follow me, so they carry a trace of my shadow," John explained. "As time goes on, they'll develop corresponding abilities." Across the training ground, a small star spirit called Little Dragon stood with its hands on its hips, looking down at the others. Little Dragon was the least popular among the star spirits, but it possessed extraordinary defensive capabilities. Even Hector's Starflash Critical Strike, an attack fired from a star spirit's large horn, laser-like and accompanied by explosive, shattering magic, could not fell it. Little Dragon's unique trait was its ability to transform incoming offensive magic into a shield-like barrier. That was why it could mock the others and still remain unscathed. "I think you should stay with Draco," John told Little Dragon. Only in John's presence did Little Dragon behave obediently. Otherwise, it drew disdain and resentment, much like Draco himself did among his peers. John sent reports about the star spirits to the two branch houses by letter. It was a good thing. The stronger the star spirits, the higher the ceiling for the Star Spirit Guards. In theory, under John's guidance, the Star Spirit Guards could grow into a corps of level 6, even level 7 magical guards. Their divergent evolutionary traits meant the race could be richly diverse, with terrifying potential. The only remaining question was whether the Star Spirit Guards could reproduce. If they can reproduce, John thought, they could arm the entire magical world. A strange, unsettling thought arose. If that ever happened, the entire magical world could be under John's control. He dismissed it with a shake of his head. He hadn't reached that point. For now, it was enough to let the guardianship of the Star Spirit Guards spread through the Silver Hand. A letter from Tang Mi arrived. Basil delivered it to the doors of the Constellation Society. John read about the Star Disciples' attempt to investigate. "Even the Star Disciples find it difficult to enter," he muttered, frowning. The Polish Minister of Magic was something else. He had made the whole Polish magical world his own. It was no surprise that Grindelwald's saints showed up in Poland. Grindelwald's faith had perished there. Fanatics would inevitably return to the place where their leader had fallen. That was why Grimm, the head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement in Poland, had opposed Ing's arrest operation. As long as Grindelwald's presence lingered in Poland, fanatics would keep appearing, a kind of terrifying, repeated assault. How could an already fragile magical society withstand it? and yet the Polish minister seemed to have a way of handling it. Those saints who entered Poland either went into hiding or were captured, and they vanished without a trace. No one believed they were simply having tea. An invisible storm brewed in that troubled land, and John's suspicions about the minister grew. Old Barty? John raised an eyebrow at another item Tangmi had mentioned. Barty's hatred for him hasn't died down. Tangmi's note had added dryly, he seems to lack some ambition. Chapter 597. Tangmi mentioned that old Barty had visited Barty frequently after returning from Poland. Logically, old Barty should have been tied up with the election. He was a strong contender. If he secured that post, he would be at the pinnacle of power. Of course, the British Minister of Magic would then need to be replaced. Does he not want this position? John asked, surprised. He had been quietly pushing the matter from behind, and old Barty's apparent lack of enthusiasm was puzzling. John tapped his fingers on the table, thinking, maybe he should go see old Barty in person. It would be a shame for someone as useful and placed as old Barty to withdraw from the contest at a time like this. But old Barty had been pressing the werewolf equalization bill. That suggested he did care about the election, so why the ambivalence? The Ministry of Magic wasn't unfamiliar ground for old Barty. He had raised the issue of werewolf equalization before. Even as minister, he didn't have absolute control, and some hardliners refused to budge. That left him working tirelessly until he was exhausted. Later, in his office, he could only shake his head. Werewolf equalization is the right course. Why don't they see it? He muttered with a headache. Pierce came in with a tray of tea. He was the sort of subordinate who insisted on doing things himself. Minister, I don't understand, he said frankly, pouring the tea. Why are you so determined to push werewolf equalization? Old Barty lifted his teacup, the black tea's aroma pleasant on his breath. He looked up at Pierce. Pierce, he said slowly, not everything is about power. He set the cup down. Sometimes you do things for reasons beyond yourself. Not for yourself? Pierce echoed, baffled. If not for personal gain, then why toil so hard? Old Barty had been a different man in the past, hungry for high office and power. But he'd learned, painfully, the cost of that hunger. He had once been willing to secure his position at any cost. He'd even sent his son to Azkaban without giving him a chance to defend himself. Yet he was not a man of pure hardness. His wife's pleas had moved him, and he'd allowed his gravely ill wife to replace Barty's place. The public had condemned him for his parenting, and his son had been embittered. Even when he kept his son at home under the imperious curse for more than a decade, he couldn't mend what had been broken. When John had told him that Barty had not been involved in the Longbottom incident, old Barty realized how grievously wrong he had been. He had sought the position he always wanted, and then buried himself in work. He was praised, best minister in a decade, in 20 years, in 50, but the relationship with his son grew more distant with every accolade. I am fortunate, old Barty told Pierce once, looking at him. I have a good partner. The silver hand had changed everything. It altered how he thought about power. He would stand in the election now, but his motivation had shifted. For Barty, old Barty wanted to make amends. The werewolf equalization bill was, to him, a way of repaying the werewolves for their contributions. After leaving the ministry, old Barty returned to the quiet Crouch House. It had once been a family home of 3. Now only he remained. He stared at his first-class Merlin medal, then slumped back in his chair and sighed. Everything all right? John's voice came from the doorway. Old Barty looked up and gave a small smile. I didn't expect you to drop by. No, John said, shrugging. I hope you don't mind the surprise. I'm glad to see you, old Barty replied. It seems you consider me a friend. John sat down on the sofa beside him and glanced around the room. Not much has changed since I was last here. You could have Winky come back to work for you, old Barty suggested. Winky, the house elf he had once dismissed, was now employed at Hogwarts. That's a good idea, old Barty said, nodding. I'll find an opportunity. Hogwarts is freer now than when you were a student, John commented casually. There wasn't a noseless fellow back then, old Barty muttered, and they both allowed themselves a faint smile. John shifted, rubbing his ring as he spoke. Tell me, are you going to run in the election? Old Barty paused, then stood and took John's hand. I think I will, he said. John squeezed his hand and said easily, "Then I know what to do." "John, are we friends?" Old Barty asked suddenly. "Maybe," John said, straightening his coat. "Depends on what you mean by friendship." "I hope so," Old Barty replied earnestly. "Then perhaps we'll go to a pub one day," John suggested with a light laugh. "That would feel more like friends." "It will happen," Old Barty said, smiling. As John reached the door, Old Barty called after him. "John, friends." John paused, nodded, and left. Old Barty sat alone in the dim candlelight and murmured, "After the election, I'll find a pub." Then he shook his head and turned back to his papers. "It's lonely at the top," he admitted to the empty room. Outside, John traced a line in the air in front of him. A thin golden seam cracked open a passage to Hogwarts. He stepped through and turned to see Draco staring at him, stunned. "How did you do that?" Draco asked. John snapped his fingers, and the passage vanished. "Magic, of course." He glanced around the common room. "Are you alone?" "Not at all," Draco said, looking over his shoulder. "I'm with Addo, and Daphne's been odd lately." "Odd how? She stopped ignoring you?" John asked. "She hasn't ignored me at all," Draco whispered, embarrassed. "Which is the strange part." John looked at him, perplexed. "Isn't that a good thing?" "It is," Draco said with a wry expression, "but it's not normal. Even if I take Otto's hand in front of Daphne now, she doesn't react." "I'd advise you not to test her limits," John said dryly. Draco's look told John he wasn't kidding. "Do you think she's been hurt? About that incident with the Muggle chef at the Chelsea restaurant at Christmas?" Draco nodded. "She might feel she can't help you." "I never thought of her as a burden, Draco." "But she might feel that way," Draco said, unusually serious. "You're too perfect, John. People feel like there's nothing they can do to help you, so they can't stand by you openly." John was surprised. He hadn't realized his friends felt that pressure. His kindness had never been transactional. He looked at Draco for a long moment. "That doesn't sound like you," he said. Draco bristled. "Fleur told me to say it." That explained it. Fleur in the Constellation Society always saw and understood more. Like Percy, she took on the role of an older sister. Where other people were blind to small emotional complexities, Fleur noticed them. "I'll talk to Daphne," John said quietly. Draco visibly relaxed. Astoria had been so anxious about Daphne, she could barely eat. Now Draco breathed easier, knowing she might. "It'll be fine," John promised, and then he let the conversation drift into lighter things as the common room settled around them. Chapter 598. The Great Hall buzzed with chatter, but John's attention was on the plate in front of him. The presentation was ugly, but he could at least make out the ingredients. "So, you've been experimenting with new dishes these past few days?" he asked. Daphne had learned from her painful experience and identified the problem. The recipes she'd tried weren't suited to Western palates. Hannah's blunt practicality had convinced her to change course. Instead of tweaking Eastern flavors, she would bring something recognizably Western to the table. "I understand the reasoning," she said. "All right." John looked at the slab of meat again, cut into it with his knife, and saw pink inside. The outside was charred, the interior barely cooked. He hesitated. The technique, seared on the outside and rare within, was deliberate. He had seen medium rare before. This was almost raw. Meeting Daphne's expectant eyes, John asked cautiously, "You didn't get this recipe from that Eastern wizard, did you?" "How did you know?" Daphne asked, puzzled. "Tell me where he lives." John tasted it. To his surprise, it was better than her previous attempts. Even without refined seasoning, the texture appealed to him. Crispy outside, tender inside, a rawness that reminded him of tearing at a beast on the open prairie. "I think werewolves would really like this," he said, and Daphne felt she'd finally found the right direction. John glanced over at Malfoy, who avoided his eyes. Lucius cleared his throat twice, and claiming he had to prepare for the Quidditch match, excused himself and left. The reshuffling of the Sacred 28 was still underway, and the Malfoy family's influence loomed large. Families that wanted in on that old alliance now had to demonstrate their sincerity. Invitations had been sent, and some purebloods found themselves weighing whether they could afford not to comply. At the Ministry of Magic, another council meeting was underway, this one to discuss the Werewolf Equalization Bill. Barty Crouch rose to speak. "With the Wolfsbane potion, werewolves are no longer uncontrollable. Moreover, because of the discrimination they've suffered, werewolves have not been treated as the victims they are. I propose we restore werewolves to full wizard status and remove them from the category of mere magical creatures." He sat down and scanned the room. An official began to speak, but was quietly silenced by his neighbor. Minutes passed without objection. Barty said, "We will now vote on the werewolf equalization bill. If there are no objections, the bill will pass." He raised his hand. One by one, the others followed. Often a bill fails not because people oppose it in principle, but because the benefits are too weak or unclear. This time, the dynamic was different. The pressure of the Sacred 28 and recent overtures from Lucius Malfoy had shifted calculations. Families were being told to show their sincerity if they wished to join. The option was framed starkly: join or be left behind. Backed by that alliance, the power Barty wielded wasn't something small-time factions could oppose without consequences. Arthur Weasley sat through the vote in quiet disbelief. He had always been at odds with Lucius. Lucius considered him a disgrace to the purebloods, while Arthur saw Lucius as arrogant and dangerous. After the meeting adjourned, Arthur watched Lucius speaking with Barty in the hallway. Lucius glanced over and, seeing Arthur watching, gave him a triumphant, contemptuous smile that felt like a small blade. Percy Weasley walked out of the chamber and, unusually, went straight to his father. "We need to talk," he said stiffly. "Then come to my office," Arthur replied. They sat down. Percy frowned. Arthur tried to keep the mood light. "My office isn't as big as yours," he said. "You can apply for an expansion," Percy replied, staring at the family photo on the desk. He avoided looking at it directly. Arthur noticed. "You didn't come home for Christmas." Molly was very upset. "I sent the presents back," Percy said without meeting his father's eyes. "Ginny's too." Arthur's voice betrayed his frustration. "Why are we like this? Lord Voldemort is dead. Why are you still so distant?" "Because we serve different people," Percy answered calmly. "You were the first to get angry back then, Dad." "You were the first to get angry?" Arthur began, stumbling. I didn't want to see my son working in the ministry on Dumbledore's behalf." Percy was no longer a boy. "Why? Because I chose John, not Dumbledore," he said. Arthur tried to avoid the confrontation, but Percy pressed on. "What I want to talk about isn't that," he said, changing tack. "It's about the Sacred 28. Arthur halted. Percy continued. "You should know the Sacred 28 is changing. New members will fill vacant spots. Extinct families will be removed." "Weasley has never wanted to join that alliance," Arthur said flatly. "That will change," Percy replied. "Change how? With Malfoy? With John Wick?" Arthur cut in. "Weasley never cared for those titles." Percy let out a long, tired breath. "You're still as stubborn as ever. Can't you stand on my side and think for once? Or at least stand with Ginny?" Arthur flinched. Percy's voice rose. "You always think about yourself. Yes, you like muggles, but what harm is that? George and Fred were helped by John, Charlie's burns were paid for by Silver Hand, and Ron was still using an old wand before he met John. You're always tinkering with those muggle things and letting your children get into dangerous things, the Order of the Phoenix, running around risking their lives." He slammed a fist into his palm. "Have you considered George and the others? Have you ever asked them what they wanted?" Arthur stared at his son, shocked. Percy had been holding all this in for years. "When our family was at its poorest, we didn't have a single galleon to spare. You made your children suffer for your principles." Percy's words were acid and weary at once. "Without me, Weasley would already be a problem for the Sacred 28. It's because of me that our name still carries weight. He, Lucius, considers me his friend. The ancient Weasleys could be wiped from the list without even being missed." Percy's chest heaved. "When will you look away from Dumbledore and consider me? Consider us. You all love Harry. Mum loves Harry. You love Harry. Even the others love Harry. But you need to think of the rest of us, too." He took a step forward and for the first time lowered himself before his father. "The chosen one is gone now, Dad. Percy Ignatius Weasley, third son of the Weasleys, asks you, think of our family, just this once." He bowed his head in a plea that was half demand, half supplication. Chapter 599. Mr. Weasley watched his proud son and could not stop thinking. Was he being selfish? Should he join the new Sacred 28? Percy's words kept replaying in his head. He stared at the rebuilt burrow, the same crooked house they had lost, and then put back together. His stubborn refusal to cozy up to other pureblood families had exacted a price. The family could not scrape up a single galleon for some things. Percy had to use an old wand for school. Ginny had to buy second-hand textbooks. The details of that pride felt very small in the face of pinched circumstances. He stepped into the burrow where Molly was at the stove, cooking. The children were out. Only the twins drifted back now and then. Christmas was the liveliest time at the burrow, but a couple's world could still be far from perfect. Chapter 615. Werewolf Golden Age. Twilight Wolf reporters flooded the atrium of the Ministry of Magic, cameras flashing and voices clamoring. Old Barty Crouch stood before them, his face lit by the staccato light of photographers' flashes. "Minister Crouch," one shouted over the noise, "did the outcome of this council meeting meet your expectations?" "Senior officials have received warnings from the Malfoy family. Does this indicate interference in ministry affairs?" another asked. A dozen other questions hung in the air. Barty's recent efforts to push for werewolf equality had been rebuffed repeatedly. Newsmen had watched those meetings fail again and again. This council session had been unusually brief, and that sharp contrast only made the press more certain something important had happened. They pressed forward, desperate for answers. Barty motioned to Pierce behind him. Pierce, trembling with controlled excitement, presented a document sealed with signatures, the kind of paper a reporter can smell from across a room. Barty took it, cleared his throat, and addressed the swarm. After discussion at the second ministry meeting of 1998, the classification of werewolves has been revised. They are removed from the category of sentient magical beings and reclassified as... The room hushed so fast you could have heard a pin drop. Reporters leaned forward. Human. Gasps and sudden silence followed the word. Barty continued in a steady voice. The equal rights of werewolves and wizards are restored. All registered werewolves will be recognized by Wizarding Society, and further discussions regarding werewolf discrimination will be held. He tapped the document. This paper is signed by Minister of Magic Barty Crouch and all 50 members of the Ministry Council. It is effective immediately. For a long moment, the atrium was still. Wizards, ministry employees, and reporters stared, trying to process the significance of what they had just heard. Among the crowd were the children of Old Jack, Zuofei, and Chu Dai. Their hands trembled. "Did you hear, Grandpa?" Zuofei whispered, eyes red with emotion. "We're human now," he said in disbelief. Chu Dai put a shaking hand on his brother's shoulder. They had waited so long for this day, too many years of being treated like monsters, of staying in the shadows. If they had not met the man they called the Silver Mask, if they had not stood with him, none of this would have happened. They wanted to run back to Silver Cross Hospital immediately to tell Old Jack, to be able to walk the streets openly, to leave Nocturne Alley without fear, to let their children go about their lives. This was everything they had fought for. Silver Cross Hospital had been Old Jack's home since his kidnapping. His health had declined inexorably. He had become a twilight wolf, an old werewolf raising his children in a world that was only beginning to accept them. He had made few decisions he could call right. Bitten before he turned 11, he'd been denied a place at Hogwarts and had transformed a childhood into a nightmare. He had left his village after injuring his family during a full moon. His absence set off a chain of tragedies. His mother died of sorrow, his father drowned in drink, and his childhood love perished in wartime cruelty. When Old Jack returned, the place he had known was gone. Grief hardened him. He drifted into the company of Fenrir Greyback and into the harsher parts of the werewolf world. Near death at Greyback's hand, Old Jack nevertheless took on the care of children like his own. After Greyback was imprisoned in Azkaban, Old Jack made a desperate choice. He sought out someone darker than Greyback and instead found a leader worth following. Under the protection of the Silver Hand, the werewolf community began to stabilize. Treatment in Nocturne Alley improved, a werewolf school was planned, and for the first time, Old Jack saw hope. If anyone would have died for the man they called King, it would have been Old Jack. Now, weeks after his kidnapping, the old wounds had closed, only to give way to the slow unraveling of age. In his final hours, the Twilight Wolf was filled with regret and longing. He whispered prayers, asking forgiveness for his greed, begging a higher power to spare his children's futures, even if he himself must suffer. "If there is a God, forgive me for praying for my children to become true wizards," he muttered. "If there is a God, place the blame on me. Let me burn in hell 1,000 years for what I have asked." He called softly, over and over, "King, King." He could not hold on. In a dreamlike haze, he thought he heard cheers and sobs, Tai Luo's cry, the voices of those who had once marched with him. But his eyes closed, and the Twilight Wolf's long vigil ended. "Grandpa!" Zuo Fei and Chu Dai burst into the ward before anyone could stop them, breathless and wild with news. Zuo Fei's grin froze the instant he saw the old man lying still. The sound in his ears became a roar. His knees gave out. He wept without restraint. Chu Dai, the eldest, steadied himself and knelt, cupping old Jack's hand. A healer gently guided the boys out long enough to give them room to compose themselves. When they returned, old Jack's hair was white, his body shrunken like brittle wood. Chu Dai took his father's hand and choked through the words, "We did it. Your wish came true." "You heard it," he whispered. "Werewolves won't be hidden anymore. We can walk openly in this country." Old Jack's hand cooled. At the news, a faint smile crossed his lips, an old man's last relief. Tears came then, not just sorrow, but a release, the fulfillment of a hope he would not see rise, but that would be carried on by his children. The Twilight Wolf had ended. His children would carry the torch, following the king's path. News of old Jack's passing reached John almost at the same moment the ministry announcement did. John's chest tightened. He stared at the letter in his hands for a long, silent while before he moved. Old Jack. John remembered their first meeting. The old man with a scarred face had come nervously asking for shelter for the werewolf community. When Lord Voldemort returned, the community refused both the Order of the Phoenix's recruitment and Voldemort's enticements. Old Jack had always stood by John, quietly loyal. The old man's death left John heavy with grief. "I hope, when you leave, you hear this," John murmured to himself. "What you fought for, what I gave you, has come true." He rose and walked out of the Constellation Society, looking up at the sky. Damp air gathered, dark clouds low and miserable. "What cheerless weather," he muttered. He drew his wand and whispered, "Werewolves are free, and so are you, old Jack." A white beam of light shot from Hogwarts and cleaved the forming clouds. Students looked up and saw it, a strike that felt like a small change in the world. John stood there for a long moment, mourning. Old Jack's funeral was quietly dignified. All of his children came. None of them hid their sorrow. In most families, the transfer of a leader's power would spark disputes or worse. Here, the succession was calm. Chu Dai resigned as head of the Werewolf Affairs Office, and Zuo Fei took over. He became the new werewolf counselor, carrying the heavy responsibility for the community and for his younger siblings. When John arrived, the children bowed. He shook his head slightly. It wasn't necessary. He waited at old Jack's coffin and looked at the old man's peaceful, flower-framed face. His heart lightened a little. "He heard it," Chu Dai said softly at John's side. "He heard about the werewolves' freedom." "Yes," John replied. He waited a long time. He reached out and stroked old Jack's face. The deep scar that had marked the old man for years gradually faded under the faint trace of John's magic. "Go to heaven with your head held highest, old Jack," he whispered. Young Tai Luo clung to one of the mourners, while Sai Wen and S walked behind Zuo Fei. Old Jack's grave was set on a hilltop near the community, so he could always overlook the place he loved. Zuo Fei came to John and said in a low voice, "Werewolves will never betray you, my king." John patted his shoulder. "Zuo Fei, take 2 days off, find somewhere quiet, and let yourself grieve." He could see the weight Zuo Fei carried and the determination to honor old Jack's legacy. The silver hand flag will always fly over the werewolf community. Zuo Fei's expression softened. John's words steadied him. John added, "Among old Jack's children, you've always been different. What you carry is exhausting." Only Zuo Fei remained at the ministry now. Chu Dai's resignation left the office reshaped. John left the funeral and stopped beneath a tree not far off. "Aren't you going to look?" he asked over his shoulder. Remus stood there and shook his head. "I don't have that right," he said quietly. "You've changed," John observed. Did the Order of the Phoenix abandon you? No, Remus answered. I want to find answers myself. Werewolf equality. I never dared imagine it. He looked at John, the young man who had made it possible. Then Remus placed a single flower at the base of the tree. Dumbledore never wanted to contest you for the crown, he added. The Order made mistakes sometimes, but not out of malice. John shrugged. If he thought so, I don't care, he said. The Order of the Phoenix is not worth my attention. Relief passed over Remus. To him, John's indifference to the Order was the best possible outcome. John glanced at Remus's patched robes. Where are your proper clothes? He asked. I gave you a set before you resigned. That set was too good, Remus said with a rueful smile. I was afraid of ruining it. He rolled up his sleeve to show patches on the fabric. John made a face, then fell into step beside him. They walked down the hill together. Remus spoke of small, ordinary plans, finding work near the community, building a proper house, settling into a life where he could repay old Jack in some small way. And I should ask Tonks out properly, he added as if embarrassed. She doesn't like being called Nymphadora. At the community's gate, Remus paused. He looked back over his shoulder, smiled, and held out his hand. Goodbye, John. John grasped it and laughed once. Goodbye, Remus. Then John called after him. Have you considered working at the ministry? The Werewolf Affairs office needs staff now that Chudai has resigned. The pay's better than in Auror's, though it's not close to here. Remus's face brightened. I'll take it. John drew his hand across the air and traced a golden line that opened a passage to Hogwarts. Go and interview with your new superior, he said. The slit of light closed. Remus stood for a moment, rubbing his forehead. Never follows the rules, he murmured, half amused, half exasperated, and then he left. A week after old Jack's funeral, life had mostly returned to its rhythm. John set aside thoughts of interviews and honors. The thesis that had helped bring werewolf equality drew more attention than ever. Whispers suggested a Merlin first-class medal was likely. Those were the kinds of things he took in stride. His days went back to their old pattern, studying the dark book, riffling through Ravenclaw tomes, searching for inspiration. Valentine's Day arrived with its own small distraction. Daphne had been working hard on a new dish, and John, always willing to be honest, sampled her creation. What looked like a kind of shrimp went on his plate. As he ate, he felt the magic within the food stir. Time seemed to slip, motion slowed, and John's reactions sharpened. Before anyone noticed, he moved with such speed that he could slip a tiny piece from his hand into another's meal without being seen. At the table, Malfoy lifted a spoonful of mashed potatoes to his mouth. John's speed was undetected. The added morsel went into the potatoes, and time snapped back. A moment later, Malfoy convulsed. He doubled over, then collapsed, crawling on the floor and gasping. What is this? He wheezed, slick with sweat. It smells like a tire left in a muggle factory for 10 years, but there's also a surge of magic. It's contradictory. He began to sprint wildly through the great hall, panicking everyone nearby. John watched with dry amusement. Daphne, bewildered, watched him bolt, unable to understand why anyone would react so violently to her food. John considered the experience and realized what had happened. If one could inject an emotion into food, as was sometimes said of Hufflepuff cooking, which could carry feelings, the effect would amplify whatever emotion was infused. Deliciousness would be intensified. So would anything unpleasant. Daphne's dish carried a discreet, nourishing magic that strengthened body and mana. For John, it had been beneficial. For Malfoy, something different had been amplified. A memory, an emotional sting, and it had unleashed his reaction. Watching Malfoy tear out of the hall, Daphne still standing with a plate in her hand, John commented lightly, perhaps he was emotionally provoked. He wondered briefly, almost to himself, whether something personal had set Malfoy off. A quarrel, a humiliation, some private blow that made him snap. The thought drifted, and then the moment passed. Life at Hogwarts, like everything else, would go on.